Here.
Mrs. Scott?
Here.
Mr. Schneider?
Here.
Ms. Underhill?
Here.
Mayor Tarter. Mayor Tarter, Laura, sorry about that. And I'm even reading Hardy. Mayor Hardy.
Mayor Hardy is here. Thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to ask everyone to join us in a moment of silence in recognition of Trevor Brown, who is a Loudoun County firefighter that died in the line of duty last month. I think today was his wake. And so in recognition of him and his family, as well as all of our first responders who are mourning his loss, I wanted to ask us to join us in a moment of silence. Great, thank you. Thank you. Alrighty. Andy, take it away. Thank you for subbing for Mr. Shield. He's on vacation.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Hardy, members of council. It's great to be with you all here this evening. We got three items on the agenda for your kind of review and feedback on this evening. We're going to kick things off with a work session on the proposed amendments to the city's MOU with Wesley Housing regarding the Virginia Village properties. And presenting for staff tonight is going to be Brendan Woodley.
Hello, Brendan Woodley here. Good evening, Mayor Hardy and council members. Wanted to take a moment to thank you for reviewing this request for the Virginia Village project. Recently, the city and Wesley were able to agree on a construction budget, and Wesley was able to officially apply for the loan that facilitates the sale, facilitates their purchase of the Virginia Village properties, and it officially kicks off the actual Virginia Village project. So since that loan has been submitted and that effectively identified a closing date of late March, targeting the 26th, we thought it would make sense at this point to go ahead and get the MOU in line with what the terms of that negotiation was to complete the that sale. So in this case, the terms as outlined included adjusting the amount of ARPA contribution that was allowed for the construction budget. Originally in the MOU, we had $200,000. We changed that through the course of the negotiations to about $900,000. Hopefully this is not new information. This has been noted on a couple of memos that have been submitted over the last few months. But this is something I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of, and I am happy to explain some of the decision making for that. And also, the other item is we agreed to use a portion of the rental income for the Virginia Village properties. Those Virginia Village properties that the city owns have several accounts. Those accounts accumulate income over time, and we're dedicating that income as equity for the project, since we had enough to actually help close that gap that was identified a few months ago. And then a couple other minor details in the MOU needed to be clarified, including what was permissible in terms of how CDBG funds were to be used. Originally, they were to be used as capital replacement funds, but we wanted to make sure that it was specifically called out to be dedicated as a source for the construction, which was a good way to help close that gap. And clarify, the other part of the amendment also clarifies the terms of the loan. For some reason, the terms stated in the MOU were not up to date. So the point is, in order to make sure this is clear, make sure that the MOU is correct. We prepared an amendment to the MOU, and the amendment updates those terms so that it actually agrees with what the city has agreed with Wesley, and that it's all of it is copacetic in order to make sure that that sale is able to happen, and the city isn't the one delaying that sale, hopefully at the end of the month. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the purpose of this amendment or any other parts of this project. And if anyone else has any comments, Cindy or Dana, I'm happy to happy to pass the mic as well.
Thank you. If I could just briefly, Mayor, I just sort of want to reiterate the points that Brendan was making. We're making minor modifications to the MOU. It is still the full core of the MOU adopted in 2022 is still the core program. We are teed up in the partnership with the EDA and glad those representatives here. At the time of closing, we would pay back council the $1.9 million that was put up to buy 2 properties, and then the EDA's $925,000 that also purchased a property. So that's part of the loan proceeds, and then those would be turned over to Wesley, and we'd be starting full force in the phase 1 and 2 of the MOU, which is maintaining and operating, and then acquiring additional properties. We do have a contract out there. Wesley has a contract out there to acquire another property, so it's starting to progress nicely. With those 2 phases well underway, we'd be able to turn our attention to phase 3, which is the one we all care about, is how to then expand and preserve affordable housing in a new framework, working together with everybody to have good affordable housing in that part of the city. So I just wanted to kind of put that in context that the existing core part of the program is not being changed. We just finally have the numbers worked through so we can progress.
Great. So before I open up questions, Brendan, thank you for the memos I think you provided to council the past several months, but I do think it's important for us to talk about it kind of in public session, because I think with the EDA along with council, it's probably the first time that we're talking about it publicly with the numbers in front of us. So while I think the memos have been good, I think this is our first opportunity to chime in about the specifics. So with that, who's got questions or comments?
Can I start?
Sure. Caroline?
Let me help unpack this too. So, and I think I'm going to Brendan and Cindy Mester, because I did take a look at this pro forma. So, I think from a transparency perspective, Brendan and Cindy, could you outline the increase? Why are we putting more ARPA money into this than the original allocation?
Glad to. I think the first piece to note is we've always put all of this money into the Virginia Village project. So when council first appropriated the ARPA money, it was $1.9 million, and we used about $1 million of that to buy 310 South Maple. The rest of the money was still appropriated for Virginia Village. We had originally thought that only about $200,000 would have to go to rehabbing 310 South Maple, and so that would been out of the remaining $900. In the work of full, instead of just a walkthrough, full inspection of the property and actually getting cost estimates, which we know all of construction have gone up in the meantime, that's now about $440,000 instead of $200,000. The other reason for keeping this full ARPA money in for more rehab instead of acquisition would be for the Virginia housing standards that are required for underwriting. They have given a lot on those, but they still have core, things to ensure, which we all agree to, health and safety and affordable housing and sustainability. So there's things like HVAC, which we just have to redo, so that added the cost. So that's the core reasons for the full ARPA, which was always in the project, but now being more targeted to rehab versus acquisition.
So I'm going to rephrase, because I want to make sure that this is also it's clear, and you keep me honest. But when we first defined the $200,000 allocation, it was low. It was 2 years ago, and we have progressed, and we're a lot smarter now, right? So particularly for $200,000 for 310 Maple, which it's one of the 6 buildings in the portfolio that we own. There's 12 in Virginia Village, so that's 6. This is the good news. Well, we just executed another one on 303 Shirley, so that makes 6, 4, 5, huh? But that
would not include the 6th one.
But it would be included in this contract that we're executing.
And that would not be included
yet, so it's not.
Got it. So, but
it becomes part of the MOU when it closes, but it's not part of the current loan pro forma.
5. Soon to be 6, but 310 Maple with the hole in the roof with water damage that isn't livable, right? That has HVAC issues, a whole regut is required, right? and 200,000 fell short. So I think the principle of all this was we were trying to get housing to a decent stage. Let's forget the word affordable for a second, but there's some dignity that we want to have the individuals that we reside in city housing, city supported housing. We're just trying to get it to decent, right? So when we take a look at that pressure in an inflationary environment, right, $200,000 is short just for 310 Maple, which is uninhabited, right? So then we've got the 4 other buildings, and the additional cost pressure is Virginia Housing, in order to issue the loan, renovation loan, has standards that we have to meet that they provide that defines decent housing. So that means HVAC, it means lead and asbestos, right? It means stormwater drainage, how things are insulated. They have a very prescribed definition of done, right, for what constitutes a residence that is in their portfolio.
Correct.
So between $900,000 that we're adding in, it really covers the $200,000 that fell short for just 310 Maple, as well as the renovation for the 4 other buildings. So that $900 is supporting renovation in an inflation environment and increased costs for financing for 5.
Correct.
So then when we talk about let's talk about other aspects of this, because I also want to touch base on some of the questions that I've also received from the public. When we take a look at the MOU, right, there's some concern from residents here around it being standalone affordable housing. So can you reference in the current MOU the language that we added when we passed this that makes sure that it isn't a standalone project?
Sure, be glad to. So I'm looking at the fully executed MOU that was an attachment to the staff report. And as I said, the core of this is remaining the same. So what's changed is only the sections that have been pulled out. So going down to page 10, section 3, this is where we get to the phase 3 redevelopment, which is the long-term vision. And it has several pieces within here. The first piece that we can just look to is the introductory paragraph, which really talked about the subject and the purpose to improve the future preservation and expansion of affordable housing so that we can be sustainable. I think it fits very well with the council's current work plan, talking about dignity, diverse housing options, and sustainable. And so it'll be a partnership to do that affordable housing project. Throughout that section, it also talks about working together to look at a mix of incomes, include a commercial use, and then redo the transportation and the network and the other amenities. And it also calls out the partners that would be part of that community dialogue to achieve the future of the affordable housing. In the working group, we have talked sort of what does that mix of affordable housing look like. And when we look at the tax credits, you can do a range of area median income, which I think is also consistent with the housing study and the needs, going down to 30% rental all the way up to an average of 80% area median income, so you can go over 100%. So it will be a range of affordable housing as well as the potential for a commercial component.
Yes, and we have that language, just a refresh of this MOU, because it's been a while, right? So you've got page 10 that indicates that it'll some amount of affordable housing that we are also going to allow on page 13. Wesley Housing will also incorporate space that would support commercial uses, right?
Correct.
And I want to touch on the fact that when we use the word redevelopment, we've learned with the Eden Center that is very scary, and rightfully so, right? But we have every intention to not displace the current residents in this, right? We have language here on page 13, right, on level 5, that we are going to relocate, right, establish a relocation plan consistent with the city adopted relocation plan Virginia Housing Guidelines, and the Federal Uniform Relocation Act, that residents currently residing in the affordable parcels, including a mechanism for implementation of such relocation. So we are not displacing anybody, correct? That is the spirit of this agreement still.
That is the spirit and the legal foundation.
Of all of this, okay. And when we talk about the working group, right, I think I want to be mindful of the surrounding residential areas, particularly those in Winter Hill that are very concerned about development, right? Can you talk to me about the working group, right? And I feel like that is a way to include community voices and make sure that as we approach the planning of this, that we have structured, right, a feedback loop, that any decisions, right, come through a working group that I think it needs to include a subset of population that's impacted.
Correct. Yeah, we have a broad outline starting on page 11 for the working group that's going to bring together the parties that have expertise in land use, planning, zoning, financing, and it says, and with the community to obtain input to come up with that redevelopment plan. And yes, we're using that word, but it is, as you called out, it's not a displacement. It will, I mean, even when we're doing the rehab now, we're going to have to temporarily relocate people, so we even have a relocation plan.
I think we want to use the word preservation of existing housing. I think we really want to make sure that when we take, like, explaining this to the public and what it is we're doing in this first stage of multiple stages, that this is clearly the intent to preserve, create decent housing. I don't know if it's quality yet,
But it will be.
it's decent.
I think that's a
development delivers the equity to get good affordable housing.
I think that's a fair a statement. It's may not really rebranding. I mean, we got the sort of the legal terms within the MOU, but it is presentation.
Kind of a strategy.
Mr. Stoddard is attending the next item, but if we think about this South Washington area plan specifically for this, it calls for the preservation of the existing 80 units and the potential to expand for additional housing. So that's clearly preservation.
Yep.
And then, you know, it does call out in here what sort of a process would be to work together on whether it's a phase redevelopment or where we start, which we've had conversations with the EDA on, and how we work with the community, and it's an iterative process. And Dana and Brendan have actually worked with Virginia Housing. They have a grant that we can apply for where they'll actually help pay for a facilitator to help us have a very intentional community engagement process.
And I you know, I'm going to hold you to this, right? Because it says that the working group will be established by the City Council and will begin meeting within 6 months after the conveyance date. So it's looking like this year.
Yes. Let's get excited that that 6 month is about to start. And it on page 12, it also calls out, we'll work with the city and EDA to determine optimal affordable housing mix and the preservation and unit size and the financial feasibility, which you touched on earlier, but just to reiterate, that's part of that stakeholder engagement process.
So Council, we can expect that as a working session topic, because when we talk about this working group and who's on it, I think we just have to, you know, pace for that and give it the right runway so that we are inclusive of engagement in the community. So let me switch to, you know, what's left. We've got 5 buildings, 1, right, good news, soon to be grandfathered in or looped in once we actually close and execute on the contract. So talk to me about what's left, because we're looking at this as a whole, you know, as a whole. We've got these Confederation Armies in here. So tell me about where the Federation of Armies is. So we've got 1 unit that's owned by Homestretch, correct? Let's inventory this.
Correct. That would get you up.
Buildings owned by Federal Realty.
They
Atlantic.
have 3.
Atlantic Realty.
They have 3.
3.
Atlantic? It's Federal. Atlantic. 3. And then where's the footprint for the other? Is it 4 buildings? 2 buildings.
So the total of 20 buildings, and so we have 3 buildings, so 12 units on the tax analyst end, And then with the ones that the city, EDA, and soon-to-be Wesley owns, they're at the
Yeah.
Big Chimneys end, including the one that Wesley has a contract on, which is a corner lot, the largest. And then Gibson is the 3 that the developer owns, and Homestretch. So we got 2 pockets there, and we've got some middle owners, property owners that Brendan's been reviewing and working with Wesley so we can do some outreach. We do know of those that are left, 2 are owned by 1 property owner and another 2 are owned by 1 property owner. And so we'll be able to talk with owners, 2 owners for 4 properties, and we've heard some interest.
I could interject. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in this topic, but before we get too far along, this might be closed session material, given that there's probably negotiating involved with the remaining acquisition. So I would just suggest that.
Summarize for me the remaining. So you got 12, and how much is it for, how many owners of that 12? We've got 6. There's total 20. We have 6.
Yep.
So there's 14 left.
Well, 6, yeah, and then
Of
the
14,
4.
it's 4 different owners, 5 different owners?
Brendan or Dana, do you have that handy? I don't remember the remaining property owner breakouts.
Of the 14 remaining units, it's probably about 10 or 11 different owners.
Okay, so 14 and then 11. Okay. Okay.
And details indeed would be closed session, but we've had reach out from other property owners. And we have in the staff report, you'll see where Brendan has sort of done a runway as to how much money we think we have of current funds and doing the loan to value refinancing. And then towards the end, to finish the project, either we will go into the redevelopment and bring some acquisition money in that way, or partnering with the developers and Homestretch to finish it out. And just this afternoon before the meeting, I heard from Congressman Byers' office, and our 2 community requests are up for vote on Thursday. And of that, 850 is for this acquisition strike fund.
Got it.
So we hope to see that heading to the president's desk soon.
And then let me... So this amendment is really, I just want to make sure the scope of the amendment really covers just the 900,000 and the deployment of rental income and the one way to use the CDBG funds, right?
Correct.
So
And this,
all funding sources related.
and CDBG was always in the MOU to allocate every year's allocation to this project. What we've done that Mr. Woodley noted is that instead of it just being for capital reserve, the first 3 years of CDBG are for the renovation to bring these units up to speed, which reduces the demand on future capital reserve, and just the delay of the project got us to this
While
point.
we're on that, because I actually had a question. So if the 190,000 was originally for capital expenditures, and we're now putting into closing, is there a new language we need to add that Wesley's on the hook for future capital expenditures, knowing that obviously there should be less demand for that? Or is that something that we're still on the hook for down the road?
It's in the main MOU that the CDBG still goes towards capital reserves of the project, and anything
Yeah.
above that Wesley is responsible for. We didn't change that part of the MOU.
Caroline, do you have anything else?
Nope, I think I just want to make sure that the original intent of the MOU has not changed. We covered not standalone, we covered the working group that allows for community feedback for particularly the neighbors impacted by this, and that it's truly around the funding sources, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Sure, Caroline, or sorry, Erin.
So I had a quick question. In looking at this, and maybe I'm more confused than I was before, I thought that the allocations were the allocations, and that what we're doing in the amended MOU is changing kind of how those allocations were allowed to be used, and that the amount that we were over what we originally allocated in December 2022 is the 922 in ARPA funds, which is 22,000 over the original 900,000 allocation, and then the 200,000 in rental income that's coming from the EDA that wasn't originally included. So I had us at like 222 over, but are you saying there's an additional 900,000 in here somewhere?
No, council already appropriated 1.9 million, which was written for rehab or acquisition. 900 of that is left. So it was always going into this project. Now, instead of it being some acquisition, some rehab, it's going all rehab. So the ARPA money is the same dollar amount. We've
Yeah.
changed the usage on the
Right,
split.
that's what I'm saying. So from where we started to where we are now, it seemed to me we're $222,000 over where we started because the rental income is coming into play and the ARPA funds went from 900 to 922 in terms of an allocation.
Maybe I can
Yeah, go for
clarify
that
a
and then
little bit.
explain the rental, and I'll jump back in, Brendan.
Sure. So of that 1.9 million, we had 922 left. In the original MOU, it said 900. I thought it made sense to make sure that we provided for use of that last 22,000. So that explains the 9 to 922. For the rental income, that wasn't provided for at all. It might not even have been considered in the original MOU. And the purpose of adding it into this amendment structure is to make sure that it's not, first of all, that if that is a material change or update, we wanted to make sure that the council was aware of it. But I certainly don't think it was in any way prohibited from the original MOU. It just wasn't included in it as a specific source. So we wanted to make sure that all of our cards were on the table in terms of how we were funding this loan.
Right, and I understand that, and I think, right, it makes sense in the amended MOU to reflect how everything actually played out with the funding and what was needed in order to bring the building, or 310 South Maple in particular, up to code and make it habitable. I just wanted to make sure that I better understood I won't call them discrepancies, but the changes in the actual funding amount between the December 2022 MOU and the amended MOU, and that everything that has gone into the project in terms of city dollars and funds is now reflected in the amended MOU, so that there aren't pots of money that are missing, that aren't shown in some sort of contractual agreement with Wesley Housing as to what was put into this.
That's, now that we have the pro forma, and as Brendan mentioned, the actual application filed with Virginia Housing, we have those numbers. And to the point about the rental income, it wasn't specifically discussed in the MOU, I think, for two reasons. One, we had hoped to close a long time ago, so there wouldn't be $200,000 of rental income sitting there, but also because this is rental income that the tenants who are living there were putting in for their mowing, their maintenance, all the expectation that would roll back into this project. Now we're specifically calling it out. 4 of those properties, the rental income is actually on the EDA's ledger in the city accounts that we manage, and then the 5th one is in the city. So you will see a budget amendment on the next budget amendment for the council's money to be appropriated for this use.
Aaron, you're... So I had some questions while we're on the money, just to make sure we're clear. So I wanted to separate into 2 columns. What is the city's equity contribution to this? And I jotted it down, so someone correct me if this is not correct. So we put in $100,000 from the Affordable Housing Fund. Now $200,000 on the table, that is the EDA's rental income. So that's $300,000 in cash. On the grants, it's still the equity contribution, even it's considered free money. We put in $900,000 from ARPA and $190,000 of CDBG. So that's a total of $1.39 million. Is that the correct kind of total all-in city equity contribution?
For the loan that's before you, that will pay the city and EDA back and rehab the units.
Yeah, I'm not counting...
Acquisition strike funds is separate.
Yeah, I've got a different category for
And
this. I'm
then
not counting the EDA that's going to get a refund of $925, the city that's owed $1.9 million. This is 1.39 is how much we have into the project that we're not getting back, essentially.
And $100,000 of the Affordable Housing Fund was the match to the 3.75. So if you're not counting the 3.75 in this pot of equity, then you wouldn't count the 100,000 because that was our match requirement for
So
acquisition.
that's correct. That's the 1.39. That's the city's equity total contribution. Separate column. For future acquisitions, now we just have 3.7 million of the Amazon Strike Fund and 850 pending the president's signature on the buyer amendment. So 4.5 or so total.
And-
Is that correct?
Yes, with one thing, just for full transparency, a reminder that 208 Gibson is for by the city, and so that equity of that property is going into this deal, and that helps with our future low-income housing tax credits or whatever funding opportunity we pursue.
Yeah, so I keep asking for this kind of accounting somewhere. I do think that that total sum is important to reflect somewhere in a staff report. I know we tried to do that in lines, whatever, of the staff report, but I do think that it's important to reflect that because it's changed over time. Like obviously with the amendment that we're talking about tonight, we're adding the extra ARPA dollars, we're adding the rental income, but I don't feel like any staff report I've read or update really has that summary. And so I do think for the public's purposes, that's important.
We can do that for your March 11th
Great.
staff report.
And then my follow-up question is, while understanding that the $200,000 in rental income might make sense, given that we just looked at our ARPA report 2 weeks ago, and we still have about 8.6 million, or no, 7.8 million remaining to spend in the next 8 months, or encumber in the next 8 months. Does it make sense to not put in extra ARPA that might actually be, because that's the most restrictive money we have, right? Like, would it make sense to actually leave 200,000 rental income as flexible money should we need it, and actually take the ARPA dollars, take additional ARPA dollars that aren't encumbered and put it towards the closing?
I think that if timing was an issue, that might be a possibility. You would have to appropriate additional ARPA money, and we need these funding sources as part of the application so we can close on the loan. If I'm understanding your question correctly. Now, additional ARPA money, given when we'd have to use it by and encumber it, it could potentially be used for additional acquisition. And we could use that before the strike fund grants, for example, like for the current one that we're purchasing or the next one.
So we do need to do the appropriation, need 2 readings before your closing date, so we have 2 more March meetings. So I would just ask staff to consider that, because in general, I'm leery about using just cash if it's pretty flexible, and if ARPA dollars are the most restrictive, I would suggest looking there first.
It would be a timing challenge to change the funding sources for an application already in housing, so I don't recommend that. Also, council is not holding a March 18th or 25th meeting, is my understanding, so there's not
Even
time
canceled 25th.
to do a budget amendment, and we had delayed the whole budget amendment for this year till May, I believe. So I think it's just a challenging timing issue with your meetings and work schedule.
It's a timing issue. We'll take the suggestion back and look at it,
Okay.
see what we can do. I do want to ask, though, trying to follow the conversation, is the rental income, does some of that reside with the...
It's all the EDAs, which is why they're here. So actually, I should probably,
All but about 40,000 of that is
yeah.
So I don't know,
EDAs.
like, so it's a little more complicated than just swapping it out maybe on some of our other allocations.
Why is it more complicated?
You tell me it's not, all right, you know, but,
So thank you for the EDA for joining us. Do you all have questions or comments?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I want to go in reverse order here just to address some of the comments. Councilwoman Land, Bob and I were both part of the MOU working group, and the MOU, both in spirit and in terms of what was documented meticulously over many hours, was to minimize risk to the city in terms of outsized operating costs and capital expenses. So it's basically, once Wesley takes over the properties, it is your responsibility. Whether it's, let's say, mismanagement or just oversight, if there's something above and beyond what was not considered, that's your responsibility. And that was a question that specifically came up as part of the negotiation. 2, as it relates to this particular amendment, and I'm going to ask a couple different folks here, both Brendan and Bob, to refresh my recollection, because Bob and I met with Brendan, this is 6 months ago maybe, about to look at how we could reduce the overall funds to close on the city's behalf as it relates to this particular deal. We were trying to close the gap, and my recollection is that this is effectively net new money that we were looking to eliminate as part of that closing the gap exercise. And most of that closing the gap, unfortunately, we were limited in the debate that we could have over what capital expenditures were necessary to get them to be livable or up to compliance and standards to allow the loan to qualify. It's not like the private sector where there is some flexibility. There were specific provisions, the Housing Authority and others, to say you have to fix this in order to get this loan to close. So those things we had very little wiggle room to close. The area where we did have a lot of flexibility, which I was a little disappointed when I saw this amendment come up, it doesn't look like we close a gap, but Brendan, again, just let me know if I'm off base here. That was around the actual underwriting assumptions. And so that was basically saying, how do they value this property to get to a certain level of loan proceeds? And we disagreed vehemently with the way that they were accounting for income, stabilized operating expenses, vacancy assumptions. So everything that goes into a model to determine what a real estate investment is worth, those things are debatable. And there were a few fairly large ticket items in there that we said just frankly are completely incongruent with how you would look at valuing this particular type of real estate, even operating as affordable. And my recollection is that we closed a significant portion of that gap. And so my question is, when debating this amendment and the additional funds needed, did we close some of that gap and now we have new maintenance and repair and capital expenditures necessary to get to close? Or when we went back to close the gap based on those underwriting differences, was there not a meeting of the minds and now we're still making up for that and then some? Because this to me looks like over $1 million of net new funds from the original allocation, whenever that was, seems like a lifetime ago.
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Sure.
And then the last thing that I will say is that I completely agree that if it is at all possible, that additional $200,000, again, assuming that this amendment is approved and council has a desire to allocate these funds, if that $200,000 can come out of ARPA, it absolutely should, because we know that qualifies and there's a ticking clock on that money, the $200,000, and it's not because it's EDA, it's just that we have complete unrestricted flexibility almost in how that money can be spent or how council wants to decide to spend that money. So if it can happen, we should take the free money allocated as part of this and keep the $200,000 in reserve.
Agreed.
That piece we'll definitely look at. And Brendan, do you want to speak to some of the underwriting? Because I know that there were things we made some progress on and some that weren't, like the loan to value and the debt ratio and some of the expenses.
Right. Well, Ross and Bob, when you and I spoke a couple months ago, we took some of your comments, some of your thoughts. Cindy and I discussed, and we pushed back a lot with Wesley. And I think ultimately where we landed was, from that point, since our discussion, the city has not committed to adding any new funds to this project. Any new funds have either come out of CDBG, which again does not impact the city's stake in this at all, or Wesley has actually contributed income commitments to this project. So the answer is, when we spoke, there was a gap. Essentially, Wesley were the ones to close the gap, and I think your input was very valuable in kind of getting us to that resolution.
Brendan, we're talking about $700,000 additional, $200 in rental income and $700 more in ARPA. So there is new money we're putting in.
I believe we'd already spoken about putting in the 900 and the 200 rental income at that point, and we were well beyond that in terms of what the gap was, and we were trying to figure out ways to reduce it from that point.
Some of it is a timing issue and who was discussing the pro bono at which time, because it has been quite an evolution of negotiations. Right. So, and it's all tax dollars. Some of it's local, some of it's federal. So we all want to be sensitive to that. So I would concur with Brendan's statement that the dialogue and the discussion was very helpful for our pushing back with Wesley and Virginia Housing. And we certainly could circle back with you on the details of that pro forma, which also, if any council member wants to do a deep dive, we're glad to do that, as we did with Ms. Leon.
Other questions or comments? Justine?
So we were just talking about how much money the city has put in. Is there an estimate as to how much more money the city will need to put in? I mean, looking at the chart for property 11 through 15, it looks like that's going to be 1.7 million. And then my understanding is that this money, the 900,000 would go to repair the 5 buildings. Are there going to be additional funds that we need to repair the other buildings as well?
But, when we buy each future ones, depending on who we do financing with, there could be some, different requirements that we'll have to look at. But we will have, going forward, the annual CDBG that goes into capital reserves. So we have the CDBG set aside for that. And then rental income would go towards your normal maintenance.
But I guess the 310 building just happened to be an oddity where it required more investment.
Yeah, it had a lot more rehab needs that we anticipated. Then it got a hole in the roof that didn't exist at the time in which we bought it, and that caused the damage in the.
And as of now, we don't know what the state of the other houses are in, as in like how much investment we would need.
The other houses that from a Virginia housing. Let me bring up that email. From the Virginia Housing Financing to do the rehab to their decent housing standards, we're looking at probably an average of about $120,000, and that's already built into this pro forma. And then won't need anything for a very long time, and then the CDBG can help with future ones. I know with the property that Wesley has under contract right now, that's been walked through by them and Brendan, and it's in fair shape. So when you look at the chart on page 4,
And 102.
line, the page number, starting after 100, because it doesn't line number the chart, that's just sort of a broad assumption, very conservative assumptions on what we have left, and if we were buying the rest of the properties, how much would we need, including financing, the loan to value to refurbish. And that's where you see the 1.8 million that would be needed to buy the rest. That does not include the federal pending money or any partnership with existing developers or Homestretch.
At the end of 7-10 years, I was looking at the MOU. Would Wesley be the one to actually develop or redevelop the property? Who would be in charge? Yeah.
They would be our nonprofit partner.
Okay.
It is set up that also a for-profit developer probably would be part of it, and the city and EDA have a strong voice.
And the working group would be.
Yes. And then it also depends on, which financing plan, ultimate partner that way would come into play. So a lot more to develop on that.
And I would just second what Caroline said, which is, starting the process for the working group earlier than later so that we do have more runway so that we can involve parties, especially neighbors that are needed to involve.
We are all very anxious to start that part of the conversation.
Other questions or comments? Bob?
Just 2 comments. One, I want to reinforce there must be some way we can, I'll call it, juggle the books so that this 200,000 we're talking about can come to the EDA to do the great things that we do and use more ARPA money to do it. Having said all that, I think it's important to point out that Brendan has worked very, very hard over a long period of time against a lot of odds and a lot of difficulty. And I think he deserves an accolade here. So I just want to say that for the record. Thanks.
Thank you. Other comments?
I just had one question on I know we're not looking to displace anyone, and the ultimate redevelopment has a 1-to-1 replacement under the MOU, so that we have to have the number of units. Do you have any idea from Wesley when this actually closes and they take over the 5 buildings, soon to be 6 buildings, any current resident who has over 150% AMI level income, if there's any such tenant, would have to go somewhere else? But so is there any such tenant, as far as you know, that would end up getting?
In the properties we currently own, no.
Okay.
They're much lower income, which is also what's made this challenging, because we were holding the rents at 30% and 40%. And we will, as part of the renovation, since we have a vacant building, renovate that first, and then we'll relocate the tenants through as we rehab their units.
Dave?
Just one question. Who determines, what is the procurement process for the work to be done? In other words, we see estimated numbers here, but how are we going to make sure we're getting the bids at the lowest qualified bid?
Brendan's been intimately involved with that on Wesley, because Wesley will be doing the work and doing the bids, but it's been a partnership, and Brendan's seen all the quotes and questioned back and so forth. So if you want more detail, Brendan can certainly comment now, but it's been
Sure.
a very carefully monitored.
You have a good governance process.
Well, at
Correct.
minimum, we make sure we get multiple quotes, and we vet them against other sources and other contemporary projects. I certainly have contacts in the construction field that can vet some of those numbers and have vetted those numbers on any of the quotes we've received so far. So I feel confident that the numbers we're getting are actually probably better than typical regarding construction, despite how high they are, because it's such a niche project, and there are multiple buildings there that have to be considered, and they all have different, they all have their own unique circumstances that need to be addressed.
And they have gotten 3 quotes and drilled down to the current GC that's before us, and they have permit plans, so we're about ready to file once we get through this step.
Right, that's what I was looking for, the competitive process, and that's what governance in the process.
And especially since we're using ARPA and CDBG, it's required.
One other comment for the city, you really need to actively manage the insurance elements of this, because the more of these you get people living there, you now have construction, really got to make sure that there's adequate insurance coverage.
Currently insured by the City of Falls Church, and as soon as the property's transferred to Wesley, they carry in the insurance, and we've specified the coverage.
You need to make sure Wesley is carrying
We are.
adequate insurance.
And Virginia Housing, the lender, will have very strict requirements on what insurance requirements are going to be for those properties as well.
And we have a significant line item in the pro forma, because totally agree with you on that.
Well, thank you for all the comments, and thank you, Brendan and Cindy, for all your work on this. Thanks for the EDA for joining us. So this is on our March 11th?
Correct.
Okay. Alrighty, up next, we have the Maple and Annandale Special Exception Application Briefing. Andy?
Thank you, Mayor. So as you stated, this is a mixed-use development presentation. It's our first work session on the topic, so we'll start off with the staff report, followed by a presentation from the applicant, and then get into Q&A with members of council. Get settled in here. I'll hand things over to our planning director, Paul Stott.
All right, thank you, Mr. Young. Thank you, Mayor Hardy and members of council. Paul Stoddard, I'm the planning director with the city. I'll introduce it briefly before I turn it over to our case planner, Mr. Jeff Hollern. As manager said, the request tonight is to receive a feedback and review a first submission of a proposed special exception project at the corner of Maple and Annandale. I'll leave the specifics of the proposal to our case planner. But I do want to sort of stress that this is in the early stage of the application. Of course, all special exceptions are a review of those as an iterative process with multiple submission coming in, multiple opportunities for review by the council, planning commission, boards and commissions, public. We are following our standard operating procedures for review of these. The materials came in about a month ago, and so we've completed our first round of technical staff analysis, and that's summarized in the report. You all are getting the first look at it tonight. And then again, following our standard operating procedures, the Planning Commission and the boards and commissions will be reviewing this in 2 days' time during the Planning Commission's work session on Wednesday. And of course, the benefit of that is early public engagement, early awareness of what the project is, and it gives the applicant an opportunity to hear from all those different stakeholders before revising and resubmitting the materials. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Hollern.
Good evening, Mayor Hardy and members of the City Council. I'm Jeff Holland with the planning staff. As Andy and Paul had mentioned, Council is requested to receive a presentation and provide feedback on a special exception application for a proposed mixed-use redevelopment project located at the northwest corner of South Maple Ave and West Annandale Road. Staff has completed an initial review of the application, including comprehensive plan analysis, small area plan analysis, and the primary and secondary criteria used for special exception applications. Staff has recommended several key items for the Council's feedback and guidance. First, one proposed commercial use is Two Birds, a combined co-working space with a daycare facility. Daycare facilities were highlighted as a growing commercial need in a special report to Council. However, they are not currently allowed in a B2 district. Possible solutions to this may include a zoning text or a zoning map amendments, or removing the proposed use from the application altogether. Second, zoning staff has identified that the building footprint meets setback requirements, but that the proposed building overhangs in their current state will require setback variances, which are reviewable by the Board of Zoning Appeals. Third, there are 2 land sales associated with the project. One in which the applicant intends to purchase a vacant parcel of land owned by the City of Falls Church and co-owned by the Economic Development Authority. That would be along South Maple Avenue. And then also the applicant has entered a conceptual agreement to purchase a portion of mostly overgrown land near the rear of the Burke and Herbert Bank along Broad Street, which is at the center of the 3 project parcels. This is all laid out for you later on in the staff report on line 213. Fourth, according to an initial run of the fiscal impact model, the projected annual fiscal impact is approximately $70,977 per acre. For comparison, previously approved SEs have generated an average annual per acre net fiscal impact of approximately $240,000. These numbers can change through a proper run of the fiscal impact data sheet after it's submitted. Last, staff has requested a strengthening of several project features such as affordable housing commitments, open space, and tree canopy as they relate to the secondary special exception criteria. In addition, staff will need further information on unit mixes, given that one of the proposed commercial uses is CRI, a group home for those with mental disabilities. A full breakdown of residential units, ADUs, and CRI units would assist in making sure that the units are not double counted. For background on the project, on January 18th, 2024, Cascade Realty and Stewart Investment Partners, through their agent Scott Adams with McGuire Woods, submitted this application to redevelop the existing 1.2 acre subject property consisting of surface parking and open space into a 7-story mixed-use building with a maximum height of 84 feet. As a summary of the application, the project features 191,300 square feet, or 89% of the gross square footage, as residential space, totaling 196 multifamily residential units, 6% of which are committed as ADUs. This represents also commercial uses totaling 11,930 square feet and approximately 10,000 square feet of publicly available open space. In addition to this, 259 spaces of on-site underground parking. The special exceptions being requested, listed on line 111, are to allow a residential use within a mixed-use development and to allow an increase in building height from a maximum of 75 feet up to 85 feet. Staff has identified other potential land use actions that will need to be carried out in association with the proposed project, such as a potential zoning code amendment, the land sales, and the variance that I mentioned earlier, as well as a subdivision consolidation with a site plan application reviewable by the Planning Commission. In regards to comp plan and small area plan guidance, staff has conducted their first review of the project against the city's comprehensive plan, which lists the subject property as part of the Downtown Falls Church Planning Opportunity Area and the Washington Street Corridor Revitalization Area. The Downtown Falls Church small area plan identifies this area south of West Broad Street as adjacent to the core commercial area, and it provides a framework for individual developments that, when combined, will create a vibrant, diverse, walkable, and bicycle-friendly destination in the heart of the city. Line 223 of the staff report lists several goals of the city's comprehensive plan that the proposed development has elements which address, such as a consideration for a mixture of uses, public gathering spaces, adequate landscaping, and on-site parking. The development also supports the small area plan's recommendations by encouraging mixed-use pedestrian-oriented redevelopment with on-site bicycle facilities. The proposed project is an opportunity to redevelop underutilized downtown commercial space in order to increase the city's tax base and improve the quality of life. Lines 283 through 337 provides an analysis of the project in its current form against the three primary criteria listed in the city's zoning ordinance. Compliance with all three of the primary criteria are required to enhance the character and well-being of the city. Lines 339 through 487 covers the secondary special exception criteria, which are discretionary in nature and discusses topics such as urban design, community facilities and uses, and transportation and environmental sustainability. As I had mentioned previously, the applicant has not included a list of voluntary concessions with their initial submittal, but has mentioned several potential contributions in regards to parks and open space, schools, and ADUs throughout their statement of justification. Staff is expecting a list of voluntary concessions to be included within a future resubmittal, along with several other pending items such as a traffic impact analysis, a transportation demand management plan, and a parking management plan. Line 449 of the report breaks down proposed automobile parking for residential and commercial uses throughout the site. By city code, the proposed mix of uses would require 362 spaces. The applicant has proposed to construct 259 spaces. A further breakdown of the parking is shown on the table on line 512. In regards to fiscal impact analysis, the methodology used in the evaluation of recent SEs, the total project revenues for this development are at $862,384. The projected annual net fiscal impact of the project is $85,173 or $70,977 per acre. This includes $615,000 in projected real estate taxes based on an initial assessed project value of $50 million. The project is expected to generate 17.6 pupils with a local cost of $19,084 per pupil. Again, these numbers can change as the project evolves. Lastly, staff has listed a tentative schedule for the project based on our standard operating procedures for special exception applications. Near future milestones would include work sessions with council and with planning commission this week, and a resubmission of materials near the end of the month to address all comments and feedback received. That's all for my staff report. We have Scott Adams from McGuire Woods here to make a short presentation, as well as several other members of the applicant team here in person and online to answer your questions. Thank you.
Great, welcome.
Thank you very much. Perfect, you got the presentation up there. So thank you for having us tonight. Again, I'm Scott Adams. I'm a land use attorney with McGuire Woods, and really appreciate the time tonight to come out and provide an introduction to this project. It's one that we're very excited about. It's an opportunity to transform an existing surface parking lot that's really not providing much of anything to the city from both an urban design standpoint and an economic standpoint, and transform that into a vibrant, mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly development that we think is really going to be accretive to the downtown Falls Church area. In addition to what we think is a very attractive building, we've tried to design the project within the context and really taking advantage of its position as really a connector site from the downtown area to some of the development that already exists and that's planned to exist further down on South Maple. We view this site really as a gateway and a way to enhance the importance of Maple Avenue I think we view that street, and I think the city views that street as sort of a city street, meaning that it's really important for pedestrian connectivity and making sure that it's a street that's vibrant, that helps to accomplish some of the comprehensive plan goals that the city has. One of the ways that we've tried to do that is by incorporating in the city EDA property that's a remnant parcel from when Maple Avenue was realigned. That's, again, a remnant parcel. It's not developed with anything right now, but utilizing that to make sure that we're able to bring the streetscape for this project all the way up to Broad to create that better connection and bring folks into or further down on Maple and really view this site as sort of a gateway that's really going to help provide that connection. Additionally, providing pocket parks, wide sidewalks along that frontage, really creating a vibrant pedestrian environment and orienting the building and the entrances to the building to Maple Avenue to make sure that we're, again, promoting that as a really great pedestrian street. You heard in the presentation that Jeff did, and thank you for that. We've got a couple of fairly unique uses that we're looking to bring into this building. The first is Two Birds, which, as you heard, is a combination co-working daycare use. We're really excited about it. It's a company that has 3 other locations in the DC area, and it's something that provides, frankly, 2 uses that are really needed in the city. There's a huge deficit of childcare opportunities, but also co-working spaces within the city. And so we really think it's something that, for this site and the context of this site, is really going to be a great ground floor use that's going to be successful. And then CRI is really an opportunity to create some diversity in the housing options within the city. We'll talk a little bit more about CRI, but really providing some housing opportunities for people with developmental disabilities, and also, frankly, for some of the CRI staff who are already serving people in the community but can't afford to live in Falls Church right now. So I think for tonight, really, we're early in the process. We wanted to take the opportunity to provide you with an introduction to the project, but also to our team. It's a fairly experienced team, a lot of folks who have done work in the city, but also our clients and the applicant at Stewart Investment and Cascade Realty Partners, who've partnered up on this project. And so wanted to, before we maybe get into the details of the project itself, just let them have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about their experience and sort of their approach to development, which I think really aligns with the philosophy of the city.
Green is on, right? All right. Hi, Mike Simmons with Stewart Investment Partners. My firm is locally based here in the region, over in Bethesda. Small business, about 6 employees right now. 10 or 12 active investments around the region here, all real estate, all types, ranging from leased, stable, income-producing properties to development sites. And, we're excited to work on this with Matt here at Cascade Realty Partners. We've partnered together, I guess, 4 or 5 different times now on different projects.
Cascade Realty Partners is just myself and a partner. We were both locally based. I recently relocated for family reasons, but lived in West Arlington and went to the kids and Creative Cauldron and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar with the neighborhood and the city. We've owned in Arlington, Georgetown, Reston, and now Falls Church. And we work very well together. As Mike said, it's our 4th or 5th project together. And you're kind of looking to decision makers and people who all work. So.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. And we can actually flip to the next one and maybe one after that as well. So just, I guess, existing conditions. I know everybody knows where this property is, but right now the site's developed with a parking lot that was formerly sort of surplus parking for the Bowl America site. It's across Maple from that site, so it was always a little bit detached and sort of a stepchild for that that project. It's surrounded by commercial mixed-use properties. Currently, there's no stormwater management controls on that site. And also the conditions for pedestrians are not great. It's got narrow sidewalks that are right up against the street, and just doesn't really present an inviting entryway into that South Maple corridor. If you can flip to the next one. So what we're proposing in terms of kind of the site configuration is utilizing the site where the parking lot is right now, the city EDA property, which again connects this site along Maple all the way up to Broad. And then we do have a portion of the Burke and Herbert site under contract. So it's kind of the back portion of their site. It's kind of overgrown right now, and we felt like it's a good opportunity to create a better footprint for this project, but also put that your property to sort of a better use than it's being used for right now. Additionally, we'd gone to Burke and Herbert initially, I guess just to give you a little bit of background, to try and purchase that entire site. I think we had the desire to try and consolidate that entire block, and felt like that would have been a great solution. Burke and Herbert really likes that branch. It's the second most profitable branch that they have, and they just are not willing to really make any changes on the core use of that at this time. And so one of the things that I think is important is understanding that use that they have right now, that bank branch, is going to be the use for the foreseeable future. But planning our building and designing our building so that it really is sort of phase one, and phase two is creating a development site right on Broad for the potential future development of that Burke and Herbert site. And so what's left there is a squared up site that is sort of the ideal size for a future office building or a hotel. It could go right on Broad and provide sort of that really great commercial use that is more appropriate on the Broad Street frontage there. We can flip to the next one. So the project summary, I'll just run through this quickly because I know staff just went through it as well. But what we're asking for is two special exceptions. One to allow mixed-use residential development. The second to allow a 10-foot height increase above the current 75-foot by right. So allowing for a maximum of 85 feet in height, which is pretty consistent with both the West Broad project that's next door to us, but also what was proposed across the street at One City Center. Additionally, I won't run through all the numbers, but 191,000 square feet, 196 units. The ground floor commercial, we've tried to maximize the footprint of that commercial and really orient it towards Broad Street. So we've got over 11,000 square feet of commercial space that's there. And then on the parking, just to talk about that quickly, we are coming in and seeking a reduction in the overall parking ratio for the residential units. So the commercial is parked at the rates in the zoning ordinance. We're asking for a reduction in the residential to go so that you have essentially a 1-to-1 ratio for each unit. We'll have a parking space, but then shared parking with the commercial spaces so that you've got those 60 spaces that can be used on nights and weekends for the residential. And when you factor in that shared parking, the ratio is about a 1.3 spaces per unit, which is pretty consistent with a lot of the new development that's happened in the city, and kind of matches up with the utilizations that we typically see in multifamily buildings. Let's move to the next one. So Two Birds, I know we talked about it a little bit, but really exciting use. If you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend kind of looking up some of their other locations. They started off in Alexandria, and they've got a couple other locations now, but it's a really kind of interesting and innovative use where you're combining that daycare use with a co-working space. So really trying to serve kind of the whole family for some of their clients. It's I think for a site like this, in terms of the commercial space, this site is a little bit different than some of the recent developments that have come through the city. It's a much smaller site, but it's also a site that's not directly on Broad Street. It's not directly on North Washington. And so the dynamics of sort of what type of retail is going to be successful or commercial uses on the ground floor that are going to be successful, it's a little bit different than when you've got those prominent locations, right on the main streets within the city. And so we felt like Two Birds was a really nice use for this site that we felt like could be really successful, but also provide for a significant need within the city for both childcare and for co-working. And so we acknowledge that daycare is not currently a permitted use in the P2 district, but I think we feel like for particularly a site like this, it's something that we would hopefully look to the city to perhaps address as making that a permitted use. Flip to the next slide. So we also talked a little bit about CRI, but CRI is a community-based nonprofit. They're about 45 years old, and they serve as a resource for people with developmental disabilities and mental health needs. They have sort of group housing that they provide, and this actually came out of a discussion that we had with Jim Snyder kind of early on, and he had suggested that there was a need for those group housing uses within the city, and so we had reached out to CRI to start some of those discussions, and I think they were very excited about the opportunity to provide or to find units within the city, and particularly within sort of a building where those units are fully integrated into the other units within the building. And so one of the discussions we've had with them, and we're still working through details with them in terms of the scope of how they want to use the space and the size of that space, but really looking at this as an opportunity to bolster some of the affordable housing commitments that we've made. And so the discussions with CRI have been any units that they would lease out in the building, we would lease to them at those 60% AMI levels that are the same as we'd be providing with the ADU commitment for the project. To the next one. So moving to streetscape, I mentioned at the top that we're really focused on how this project relates to Maple Avenue. That was a really big major design focus for us as we were coming up with the concept. And so what we've proposed is some fairly significant streetscape improvements along Maple Avenue and also the Annandale frontage of the site to bring the site up to not only sort of the city standards and the design guidelines in terms of the landscape amenity panels, the 10-foot clear sidewalks, the building zone, but also making sure that we're adding pocket parks, opportunities for seating and other gathering spaces along that frontage to really turn that into a nice, not only pedestrian environment, but a place where people can stop and gather and mingle and rest. And so we're very excited about sort of that ability to bring people all the way from Broad Street down through the entirety of the site down to Annandale. Flip to the next one. And just to give you a feel, this is sort of straight from the city's design guidelines in terms of kind of the 10-foot clear sidewalks, the sort of the functionality of that street frontage, and some of the standard streetscape elements that are being proposed. Flip to the next one. So we've already talked a lot about the connectivity, so I won't sort of harp on it too much more, but just wanted to sort of show how we've envisioned kind of the connectivity of this site to the north, taking people into the Broad Street downtown corridor, but also, obviously providing a connection up to Park as well. To the south, really providing that entryway, that connection down to some of the development that exists and that's proposed on South Maple. To the west, really good connections to the Harris Teeter and to Big Chimney Park and other elements west of the site. Into the east, once One City Center, comes back in and is potentially developed, providing a connection to the east as well. So for the architecture, again, we're sort of at the early stages on some of the architecture, but I think in terms of our design drivers for how we came up with the building design, really looking at this site as a vital infill component within the downtown area, as it's sort of just one set of properties back from Broad Street, but really using the building to celebrate enhanced connectivity, and also to address housing needs and provide a diversity of housing options, along with an active and really transparent ground floor commercial space. Next. So the building itself is 7 stories. It's a combination of two floors of concrete with 7 levels of, I'm sorry, 5, sorry. Yes, 7 plus 2 would not equal 7. 5 over 2, so 5 levels of wood frame construction over the 2 levels of concrete podium. In terms of kind of the building design, we have really tried to break up the building to make sure that you have really good fenestration, you've got courtyards, you're providing a lot of architectural features so that it does not read as sort of a monolithic building along both Maple and on Annandale, and really creating some architectural interest in terms of material changes, balconies, other architectural elements. Flip to the next one. So this is just a view from the corner of South Maple and West Annandale, trying to create a sort of prominent corner there. The building does incorporate the proposed traffic circle that the city's moving forward with at this corner, and so trying to make sure the building sort of relates to that and kind of that new frontage pattern, and really creating kind of entrances right at that corner as well. Flip to the next slide. So just kind of walking through the elevations. This is the southern elevation along West Annandale. There's a secondary residential entrance on this frontage. This is also the sort of the vehicular access point to the site. If you look kind of on the ground floor all the way to the left. And then also this is where the loading and the trash access are along the West Annandale frontage. Flip to the next one. So the Maple Avenue frontage, again, just really trying to focus on how the building relates to the street and to Maple. Really focused on the ground floor transparency, creating some visibility into the building that will help with some of the activation. This is also where the main residential entrance comes off of Maple, and then a lot of the commercial entrances all come off of Maple as well. We've got a courtyard with landscaping on top, and because of some of the grade change, that courtyard actually becomes somewhat visible from Maple, and so trying to make sure that we are using that as a way to, again, connect to the street, create some activity along that frontage. So the next one, the north elevation. So this is facing Broad, sort of in the foreground. You'd have the Burke and Herbert site. As you move sort of from left to right on the screen, those units are sort of up along the property line, but not adjacent to the Burke and Herbert site. And then as you move to the right, you've got the courtyard that's set back, but then we have a wall with a mural, and the background on that is that portion of the building is actually up on the property line, and it's designed so that in the future, when the Burke and Herbert site does develop, that becomes sort of a shared party wall with that development. But in the interim, really focused on putting a mural there and making sure that it's attractive from Broad Street. And then on the northern side, this is where the building is directly adjacent to the West Broad project. So on the ground floor, you've got a party wall between us and West Broad, and then units above that are stepped back to create separation from that building. Flip to the next one. So just on the ground floor, maybe to walk you through sort of our thinking in the design, what's in light blue along Maple is the commercial space. Behind that, and sort of the light green, is some of the ground floor residential space. So the lobby. Along the West Annandale frontage, you've also got a fitness center that'll have a lot of good transparency to create some activation on that frontage. The loading is in between the commercial and that residential amenity space. That's to make sure that we're able to provide loading and trash service efficiently for that commercial space. In terms of parking on the first floor, most of that parking is commercial parking, so parking for the commercial space on the property. We do have a certain number of sort of visitor parking spaces, new tenant parking spaces there, but there's a connection. If you look at sort of it's the top part of the screen right next, I'm sorry, number 1. That's actually a pedestrian connection from the garage out to Maple Avenue, so that folks who are coming to the commercial space, it's a really easy walk, to get to the main entrance to that commercial space. Additionally, where one is, that is where we're proposing our bike storage for residents. So it's at grade, directly off of Maple, really trying to think through those multimodal aspects and make sure we're promoting bike riding. And so putting that bike storage in a really convenient spot to encourage residents to make sure they're biking rather than taking a car. To the next one. So this is just the second floor space. It's a combination of units, and you can see the 3 courtyards that are there. And then we also have the community room that's proposed on the second floor. And then floors 3 through 7 are just residential units. Next one. This is just the underground parking. So we've got 2 levels of underground parking that are proposed as part of this project. And we already talked a little bit about kind of the parking reduction, so I won't go back through that. Next one. So the landscape and open space, at the risk of reiterating some of the stuff we've already talked about, the frontage on Maple is a spot that we have really been focused on, and you flip to the next one. But wanted to give a little bit of a feel for what we're thinking on kind of that pocket park that's right at the entrance to the site. Combination of sort of hardscape and landscape, creating seating opportunities, but really turning that into a really nice gathering space. And this is something where I think part of the preliminary conversations we've already been having with staff. We've gotten some good feedback on ways to improve this space and sort of rethink about sort of how this space is designed and used. And so look for that to evolve as the project moves forward. The 3 courtyards, I won't go through all the amenities, but it's mainly sort of typical amenities that you would see in a multifamily building. The one thing I will point out is the north courtyard is designed as a green roof, and so you've got landscaping there, but it's mainly functioning as a green roof for stormwater purposes. From a transportation standpoint, talked about a little bit, but really trying to align this project with some of the city's goals for multimodal, but also pedestrian connectivity and prioritizing pedestrians. Most of that is making sure that we've left the Maple Avenue frontage sort of untouched from a pedestrian standpoint, so that you've got a unified streetscape with minimal conflicts with vehicles coming into the project. Additionally, we have a bunch of multimodal aspects that we're proposing as part of this, a robust TDM program. We talked a little bit about the private secured bike parking, which is something we're excited about, but also public bike parking with racks along the frontage on Maple. And then the parking reduction. One thing that we're also excited about that's, I think, the first time that it's been done in the city is contracting with a third party that's going to provide car share services for residents of the building. So it'll be demand-based. which will determine the number of cars that are provided, but that'll be a service for residents of the building that they'll have a dedicated car share. Again, trying to reduce the amount of car ownership that we're seeing as part of the project. From next slide. From environmental standpoint, we have committed to LEED Silver. I think we're still talking with the staff about ways to enhance some of the environmental commitments there. From a stormwater management perspective, really trying to return this site to more of the natural hydrology through green roofs, establishing tree canopy, and some of the bioretention stormwater facilities that are being proposed. We're also proposing EV chargers in the site to serve 5% of the parking spaces that are proposed, and then a commitment to wiring the building for service at 10% of the spaces for EV parking. And then working on general kind of carbon reduction measures in terms of advanced HVAC, effective lighting controls, and other elements that we're still kind of working through. I guess while we're talking about the environmental piece, I know you all are well aware of it from the Quinn project in terms of kind of the sanitary sewer flow issues in this part of the city. And so we've been coordinating with city staff on that in terms of where this flow ultimately goes, and if it needs to go to the force main that's being proposed as part of Quinn. We have that built into our project to get those sewer flows where they need to go. From a fiscal impact study stance, I will say that these numbers are sort of evolving. Even the preliminary numbers that were presented in staff's presentation, I think, have evolved since that initial submission. We've had a number of conversations with Becky Woodsman about some of the inputs that were going into that. I think our numbers were significantly higher than the numbers she had come up with. And I think part of that, I think we've started to nail down where some of those differences are. And so I think as the project evolves, you'll see those numbers are going to come up significantly in terms of what the city's model shows. So I know that was a lot, and I apologize for going on for a while, but wanted to make sure you had a comprehensive kind of overview of the project. We think it's going to be a great project. We think it'll be additive to the city, and we're excited to kick off this process with the city council tonight. So I'm going to stop talking.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm sure we've got questions and comments. Who wants to go first? Debbie?
Since I have the live mic all night, I don't know if I can be quiet any longer without... No. Thank you all for coming in. I spent over a decade in the building across the street from the site, so well aware of its current state. Spent a lot of time walking by there in both directions. So I'm interested in continuing to talk about improvements that are possible on that site. Where to start? Okay, so on the environmental topics, let's just start with, I definitely will want to see like the tree canopy, percentage of tree canopy we can get on this lot. I've been going through on the South Maple side, it looks like all trees are on the second floor on that canopy, which I know you said based upon the grade you'll see some of, but how much of that property on between the building and the sidewalk will have any kind of green? I saw a couple references to pocket parks. Maybe I just can't quite tell, but
yeah, so you'll have a combination along Maple of both the street trees, but also ground floor landscaping that'll go in as part of that pocket park. And that's one of the comments that I think we had already been talking about with the staff was we had proposed saving a couple of the street trees that are currently out there right now. And I think in looking at the quality of those trees, it's probably better to actually make the sidewalk go where it should go and replant those in the location where the trees are going to be more successful. And so that's one thing we're looking at is ways to sort of maximize those plantings now that we're probably going to make the shift from trying to save those sort of poor quality street trees.
Yeah, several of them are not native species as well, I know. But so when you come back with further information, if you go to outline as a percentage of the overall site, what the tree canopy is on I'll call it the ground, on the street level, that those who are passing by on either side can enjoy. The same with the pocket parks. You know, you mentioned a couple of them, but one of the courtyards is on the roof. Love the green roof concept, but that's not something that people walking by on either side will be able to take advantage of. You know, some of the height we put into the Quinn building was, you know, in essence, the balance of the very large park space and public area that could be shared. So I want to really understand a little bit better the tree canopy, how big the pocket parks are, you know, what you envision, how large of a group you envision being able to be there, what it looks like, etc. Since you have the green roof, I don't know what percentage of the roof that is, but is there any discussion of solar? I mean, it's high enough that it would be, and my belief is that'd be an area that would get a lot of light that could take advantage of solar, and if not now, when, and what would you be willing to do to have it solar ready?
Yeah, and that's something that's on our radar already, that we're looking at ways to make the set solar ready.
And then in terms of EVs, I know you said 5% with wiring for 10%, but if you look at any of our state requirements, our federal requirements, what car manufacturers are being mandated to be delivering in terms of EVs in the future, and certainly within the first 5 years that this building would be operational, it's going to far exceed 5%. I know you can talk to one of our council colleagues who got stuck in Richmond with an EV, couldn't find a place to charge it. So that's hard. You have to be really motivated right now to buy an EV because there aren't any places to charge it. So we need more leadership in our public-private partnerships in this area to really demonstrate how we're going to be able to support the EVs that are going to lower the greenhouse gases, that are going to help us meet our emissions goals by 2030, 2050, et cetera. Okay, so solar, EVs, tree canopy, pocket parks. You mentioned a connection to Harris Teeter. Is the connection you're talking about the walkway behind you? You said connections to the property to its west, which is Harris Teeter?
Yeah, so we have an entrance to the building that's on Annandale, and so the connection would be walking on the sidewalk on Annandale, and then the connection that goes through the parking structure for Harris Teeter to get to the entrance there. Okay. I guess you could walk around the other way on if you went out on Maple and went through the front entrance on Broad as well. Okay.
The uses that you're talking about, we've both Letty and I actually happened to tour one of those co-working spaces, and while there's certainly a need for daycare and co-working, there are several of those other locations have very specific traffic management because you're coming into a parking lot and you've got small kids that are are all coming in kind of the same time in the morning and then exiting in the evening with large quantities of small humans and large cars. And it looks to me like you'd have to park in the parking lot, go out the back door by the bike storage, and then go around to the commercial. Is that the way you'd access that with your kids you're taking to daycare?
So I think we're still working on sort of the practical. We just haven't gotten to that point yet with okay. Two Birds, frankly, in terms of like their pickup and drop off patterns and how that would work. But it's something that is absolutely on our radar in terms of making sure we get that right in how that access is going to work in those connection points, because I think
that's certainly important before any decisions made on use for that, because if we can't demonstrate a safe access to and from, then in my mind that negates it as a possible use.
Part of their model was to offer the co-working so parents avoid rush hour, so they come, they park, they walk in to get in, they work for an hour or two, then they go off into their office or back to their house or whatever.
So their models, you have to be there if your child, you can't leave them for daycare there. You have to be co-working.
You absolutely can.
That's what I mean, like you're...
But that structure is intended to mitigate some of the drop-off craziness with the drop-off, so park and stay rather than having as many cars coming and going.
Right. It's still the same access to the childcare with small children that would be included. And then, of course, you'll need to come back with clarity on number, sizes, units of ADUs, and how big they are, and that impacts how many students there would be, which impacts the cost to the city. And while I've always been a big fan of the Miller House and having those residents stay with us in Falls Church City that are developmentally disabled, I really want to understand what the commitment is there. You said you'd work with CRI to have rental at 60% AMI within the building. So they're going to have office space and then they're going to have rental units. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so a couple things with CRI. It's not a group home. We initially proposed them with the idea of one large unit, and they said their constituents prefer to prefer to be in their individual units, and so we envision as kind of a master lease of a certain number of units that they control, which ones are staff and which ones are their clients. So their staff often can't afford to live in infill areas of Washington, D.C., yet they have projects here that they need to access. So it save down on their commute times as well as on better access.
And presumably those will be integrated throughout the building?
Yes, right.
On the design on the Annandale side, so the commercial is, none of that commercial is serving people who walk by. On, like, the gym is for the residents, the lobby is for the residents, there's one that shows like the corner. The reason I'm asking this question is that we have some experience with buildings that have those overhangs over the commercial fronts, and they've really negatively impacted, those are the restaurants we replace and replace and replace and replace and can't seem to get the, the stickiness to those retail spaces. And so I'm always nervous when I see an overhang over what is to be commercial space. But
yeah, we can talk about that, but it's the overhangs. I don't believe, particularly on the West Annandale side, I don't believe they're overhanging like any of the entrances to the commercial space.
So the only commercial that you're looking at there would be on the very far right side of that. Once you get to, once you get to the loading dock, I believe, over to the left is all the second entrance, the gym, and then the parking garage entrance.
So the glass frontage from the parking or the loading to the right?
From the egress door to the right would be part of the commercial space, but a lot of there's other points of ingress and egress for that space as it's currently designed. So you can pop in doors all along Maple. And so presumably, if it weren't too bird and it was just a general commercial space that was carved up 2,000 or 3,000 feet, I would think that they'd want their entrance on Maple and on the Annandale side.
And so and what you're proposing on Maple is flush, so there would be no overhangs?
Correct.
Limiting the sight line to the
overhangs are kind of on either side of that corridor.
The party, I guess the term was party wall. Sounds like it should be a lot more fun than they look, honestly. Oh.
So sorry.
I'm one of the architects. The main retail space is along Maple. So on the Annandale, as they were describing, it's on the very tip of it, and the overhang that you see is fairly high. So it won't obscure any other retail. It's a typical commercial space.
What's roughly the overhang dimensions? I can't tell from the 3 feet. Yeah. Okay.
So that's also, it's on an angle as well, so it's 3 feet at its memory survey. It's 3 feet at its maximum, and it kind of angles back.
Because it showed like a pillar.
It's all
that's different.
That one's
that's
different.
the other.
So
that's the other corner.
Yeah, we can talk about that. So that's the it's sort of it's an overhang that's where the main residential entrance is coming off of Maple, but it's also where the connection is to the parking garage, and then you would go under that overhang to get to the secure bike storage as well. Actually, if you can flip back to so it's on the right hand side there. And there's actually, it's probably a better shot of that actually if you go back 2 slides. Yeah. Nope, I'm sorry. There we go. That's the one. So that's showing kind of what that overhang looks like. So it's actually fairly high. So it's sort of not super closed-in space.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It allows a lot of light in, but it also allows protection for people who are coming into the building towards the entrance. So
And is that pillar structurally required on that corner? Are there other options to?
the structure,
Yeah.
it supports the corner of the building.
So that's what I'm saying. It has to be in that corner, in that current configuration. Oh yeah. So the party wall. There's one on the west, the Harris Teeter side. Well, yeah, that
Yep.
Harris Teeter side.
Yeah, and that's just that's sort of the gray on the first floor there.
And approximately where does the Harris Teeter building, how far do they overlap if you're looking at that picture? So how many of these apartments would be looking at apartments in the west, West Broad?
I think it's the entirety of it is.
Entire of the side is apartment to apartment.
This is where we have the green roof on top of that party wall. So these units that you're looking at here will be set back 13 feet. So the party walls, and then you have a 13-foot setback with our strip of green roof, and then our units would start.
And there's change in facade color, but no articulation on that side. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's fairly flat on that side.
Okay. And then the party wall on the Broad Street side is what you'd see above Burke and Herbert, where you're proposing a mural?
Correct.
So that's about, I mean, Burke and Herbert's only a story and change, right? So that's about 6 stories of a...
And that's sort of anticipating the future development so that they can maximize the footprint on their site as well.
Okay. And I have concerns about that being our view on Broad Street. I don't have an answer to that yet, but having 6 stories of a gray cement wall, no matter how attractive the mural is kind of tough to have on the main corridor. I understand what you're saying. We have the same situation up at West Falls, but we've lived what that wall looks like, and it's not even not that tall. I can't remember how many stories it is.
It's that big.
It's the same size.
But we had a commitment for a phase 2.
Right, with a commitment for a phase 2, and that isn't happening in the foreseeable future, and we see what it looks like and hear a lot of comments from our residents on what that looks like to them. So I just wanted to share that, and I'll stop talking for now. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to share my initial comments.
Mary Beth?
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I do appreciate the effort to try to do something because it is an underutilized parcel. And it seems like it's about time to do something there, so I appreciate you taking that effort. All right, I'm going to start with the 2 birds as the primary retail. It just seems like you need a little more commercial. That is, the 89% residential is not nearly the right percentage if you look at the other projects that we've approved. I know this isn't right on the main drag, but we need more than a daycare use for the commercial piece. My thought. The streetscape and the sidewalk. How wide is the sidewalk on Annandale and then on Maple?
So you've got the 10-foot clear sidewalk itself, and then you've got the landscape amenity panel, which...
Wait. Pretend Dave Tartar's here. What is from the building to the base of curb?
All right, so you want me to go from building or from curb?
Curb.
All right, so from curb, you've got it's an 8 or a 10-foot landscape amenity panel in the design guidelines. 6. I'm sorry, a 6-foot landscape amenity panel, which is what's called for in the design guidelines. The 10-foot clear sidewalk, and then we've got a building zone that varies just because the frontage of the street, particularly on Maple.
So you've got 18 to 20 feet on Maple, and then what do you have on Annandale?
It's the same, I think.
The same.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the part where then.
Other than we've got those overhangs that start on like the third floor, but those are.
So they overhang into that
by about
airspace. It looks on the drawing like the Maple is much larger, much wider than the Annandale side. That could just be the drawing, but.
So I think part of it is that it varies because the curve of the street and the building doesn't exactly match the curve of the street, and so it gets wider.
Oh, so some of those parts along Annandale are wider than
The ones on Maple, it sort of varies.
Maple, sorry.
On Maple, just depending on
Okay.
The angle of the building in comparison to the curve of the street.
Okay. Like Mrs. Scott, I think you said this, I'd like to see some more green space there. It seems like, I like the articulation of the building. I like that there are different areas to it, but the fact that so much of the green space is above and not accessible by street level, I think we need a little more street level green space. And then I looked for Dave Charter's favorite thing, cementitious siding, and I didn't see it anywhere until I got to page 9. And Nichiha is cementitious siding. But we have all learned our lesson, and we don't like cementitious siding. We would much prefer brick or metal everywhere. And that's how we've approved every building that we've approved in the last several years. Is there any bike share?
So we don't have a bike share proposed as part of this project, but I think if there's a plan for bike share.
In the voluntary concessions, as you work on those, that's something that has come up in a lot of our recent buildings, is either a bike share contribution or a space for a bike share station or both.
Yep.
So include that. And then this is more for staff. And I'm just wondering about the fiscals on this building and what the daycare use, how is that as far as fiscal return? How is that taxed?
So the fiscal impact model, the numbers that were in the report, that was based on a service use or all the commercial?
Service use.
Service uses.
So when we rank, grocery stores and restaurant uses are highest. Where does service use fall in the rank?
It tends to be lower with office.
Okay. Office is the lowest. And what else do we have that is service use?
Well, I mean, the code has a whole...
Right. Well, just in the ones that we've approved recently.
It's everything but the retail. Remember, we always were going over the retail versus service. So there's
gyms, nail salons.
Gyms, okay.
The retail is the higher one.
Got it.
And then, the service.
Okay. Okay. So again, my earlier comment about commercial, it'd be better to have a higher use commercial than just only a service use on the first floor. All right. And is there a walkway in between the Harris Teeter and your building? Or in between the party wall and the other wall? Is there any kind of sidewalk, walkway access?
There's not. Those buildings are...
They'll be right close together.
With one another. But I think as we kind of look at the pedestrian permeability, you've got the north-south connection along Maple, and then you've also got the north-south connection that the city council rightfully put through the garage in the Harris Teeter project. And so I'm not sure in terms of like the functionality of adding sort of a third.
There's not anything there now. Right. Just curious if you had put one in. Okay. That's all for now. Thanks very much.
Who wants to go next? Justine?
So I'll start with some of the things that I do like. I like replacing a parking lot with something that's far more walkable. I think the design is quite lovely. The intersecting planes of the building is actually quite nice in the strong, prominent corner. I think really fills out that space nicely. There are probably other things, but I'll move on to what I care the most about, and actually picking up on Mary Beth's comments. Yeah, there is a path through the Harris Teeter, but it's a fairly unpleasant pedestrian path. And so this is probably the largest change, but it's something that I care about the most, which is providing a nice path on the side of the building. I know one story up, you show green. It would be nice to have that on the ground floor. If you look at a Google Maps street view of, and you're in the parking lot of the Burke and Herbert, there's actually someone not going through the Harris Teeter parking lot, but going through that side path right there that exists now. Other things are, so the bike lanes will still stay on Maple Avenue, is my understanding. And so now there's going to be a traffic circle there for those who are younger or more inexperienced. It would be nice to have some sort of ramp for kids or younger bikers to get up onto the sidewalk to then use the crosswalks to get across the street. So near each crosswalk, it would be nice to have some sort of ramp that connects to the bike lanes. Same thing on Annandale. Are the roads going to be redone in any way as part of this project?
We're proposing on-street parking on Annandale to try and shrink down some of that footprint. It's a fairly wide street for the amount of traffic that's there, so we're proposing on-street parking.
I totally agree. It is a very wide street. It's actually far too wide. I would like to see a bike lane rather than parking on Annandale. Other things, went over that. Do you know what sort of car sharing, have you looked into car sharing services that you might use? And what are they? Would it be like?
So Greystar would be our property manager, and they have it. They gave us 2 or 3 names. I don't have them on the top of my head, but essentially you sign a contract with the third-party group, and they determine the demand and place cars based on the demand.
And would it be only available to residents of the building, or is it something?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so something like Zipcar, other people could use, but this would be specifically reserved for people in the building.
Yes.
I would be curious to know what services. Other things, for the shops, are you planning to have a warm lit shell for the shops? Oh, there's no retail besides the daycare. Besides the daycare. Oh. Okay, so that gets to Mary Beth's point, which is, okay, let's see. But for the fitness center, would that be accessible? Is that a fitness center for the public, or is that a gym that's in the building?
That's an amenity to the residents.
To the residents, okay. Other things. Is there, something that I would like to see is some sort of where the loading dock is and where the traffic circle is located. I would like to see some sort of loading dock plan, because it's not clear as to how.
It serves like an auto turn showing how the trucks would get in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Other things. I would be in favor of, actually, I'd like to hear from staff a little bit more about the consequences of rezoning B2 to daycare. It sounds fine to me. Like, there's a list of options that we could do. I would generally be supportive of it unless there's any sort of major drawbacks to that.
Yeah. So we, in the staff report, we included sort of a range of options. I think right now the B2 zoning district does not allow daycare as a by right use. So there are a couple different paths you could take. You could consider making it by right, which means anyone with a B2 zoning district could stand up a daycare. Certainly other jurisdictions have seen success with daycare as being sort of a catalyst for other commercial and office activity, because people who work in offices often have kids and they need places, to store their kids over day. Right.
Sounds like they're box.
I think there are other options that might preserve a little bit more council control over this. You could list it as a conditional use, which would require it to go through some sort of special use permitting process, or you could consider it only as part of a special exception application. I think you'd want to sort of think through what are the different options that might be sort of best suited to sort of the outcomes council is trying to achieve, right? So if it's intended to be supportive of other commercial uses, you want to think through how to achieve that and how to structure it.
In the documents, it said there were 2 public gathering spaces. I noticed you pointed out one. Where was the second one?
The second one is a smaller area right at the corner.
Okay.
Just because the building is set back and because of the curve with the new traffic circle, we've got like outdoor seating that's proposed there at the corner.
Great. Let's see. This is a question for staff. I noticed in the staff report the fiscal impact was lower than other buildings. I was curious as to why, and then it said that staff was working to strengthen that. What would be the ways to strengthen that?
Sure. So, and I'll acknowledge again that this is an early run of the fiscal impact sheet. Typically, those numbers get sort of tightened up when we get our fiscal impact data sheet, and that has more clarity on the unit mixes that are going in on the residential side as well as on the commercial side. Also, it usually takes a couple passes to make sure that we're talking about the building valuation the right way, whether we're using a construction value or an income-based model. And that can be done in a couple different ways. We do it in concert, obviously, with the city's assessor. And so it's common for those numbers to flux over conversations. I think we've looked at some sort of potential runs where those numbers could be more in line with other projects. But really, in order to get that into our staff report and be confident putting that number out, we want to see that fiscal impact.
It's also the tax revenue of daycare. The reason why it was prohibited in certain places is because of the revenue that a daycare brings in from a tax perspective.
Gotcha.
Versus other retail or grocery or restaurant or other things like that. So that's just a number.
Do we have a sense as to, are these 2-bedroom units, or we don't know?
We've got a preliminary kind of breakdown of it.
It's on 512 staff report. There's a table.
Oh. Sorry for missing that. I promise I did go through all the documents.
There's a lot of them.
I'll look that up in a moment. I guess so. Just my last 3 comments are: I really like the strong definition of the corner at Maple and Annandale. I would like to see it's sort of, and I know it's not on a corner when you get towards the Burke and Herbert Bank. That's sort of in the mid block, but it would still be nice to see a little bit more definition at that end. And then. Also, potentially, and this is working with planning and DPW, if it's possible to actually get protected bike lane on Maple. Maybe it's just the flexi posts or something. And then, I guess going back to the potential path or pedestrian path next to the Harris Teeter between the 2 buildings, It could even be something that's a really wonderful draw. Maybe it's an Instagram alley or it's something that actually brings people to this space that's unique. So I would encourage creative thought to that.
Caroline?
While you're depicting this unit breakdown, could you give me a rough, what's the square footage size of the studio bedroom versus 2-bedroom? You had a rough estimate?
We may have to just get you that information. Okay. I don't know if we've got the
okay.
Square footages right.
I'd ask that you rethink the affordable. I'm trying to process that allocation, right? You're saying that it's a 60% AMI. If you're partnering with CRI, 60% is $63,000 annual income. You might have to step that down for individuals, right, in the population that you're trying to serve. So I just want to make sure you partner with CRI and you don't overset that income to not serve the population that they're serving.
It's a good point. It's something we're aware of in some of those discussions and sort of what those income numbers look like. So I think from our perspective on the affordable commitment, the desire is to work with the city to find what the right solution is, and work with CRI to find what the right solution is that meets everybody's goals.
I just asked you to take a look at where we've headed and where that contribution has been in the past, right? And look what you can put your best offer forward on that one. And include a number, right? Like I think the 6% needs to translate to a number, is that 12, right? As well as, please consider setting the affordability term. Is this permanent affordability, right? Like we just have a high bar. When we switching to, is this a party wall or a boundary wall?
Which one? Sorry.
So that wall that's facing Harris Teeter. So a party wall is shared, meaning there's a line.
I'm sorry. It's a boundary wall.
Okay, so okay.
Yeah, it's
We will have a new wall. up
Completely
against it.
different legal terminology if you make it a party wall. Okay. Yeah, no parties happening. It's a boundary wall, right? It's on your side of what you're pitching. Okay, just making sure. All right, and I think when you just please consider the flow of this, right? From an accessibility perspective, I have walked with my children through that parking lot in Harris Teeter, and it is not ideal to get access from Broad over to Annandale. Sure, we can walk around, right? But I would just ask around activating flow appropriately from all assets, from just all facets of your building, and just placement of that boundary wall. I'm trying to understand, does it have a functional purpose? Do you need, can you make a green space? Like I'm trying to figure out the functional purpose, what the functional intent is, and whether
it's part of the garage.
Oh, so it is the wall of the garage.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all right. Okay, thinking about that one. And I just wanted to rationalize, when you talk through LEED Silver, is there flex? Are you set on the silver, or when you build like your past 4 projects? I'm just curious. Are all of them have they all been LEED Silver? Is this kind of the standard? You know how to do LEED Silver.
We rely on our third parties. Okay. Know how to do it. This is quite honestly my first ground up development project. We've done a lot of existing buildings, but
okay. So this one's good.
Gone through.
Okay.
But I think the answer on that is that we're open to having those discussions with the city and working on the green building commitment.
Yeah. And so I think I'm just, the final thing is just taking a look at the fiscals. You're asking for an exception on height. And I'm looking at the fiscals. They don't look so great. So I'm trying to balance the trade-offs around it's I just asked you to think about the trade-off you're asking us to make on that. Just think about that.
Yeah, understood. And I think the numbers are preliminary. I think the initial numbers we had are significantly higher than the numbers that the city's initial run came out at. I think the other thing to think about is just the comparison to what's there now, which is not accretive to the city's finances in terms of kind of the remnant parcel that the city and the EDA own, and the city, the parking lot that's there now. So there is sort of a comparison of the starting point as well. Like we talked about in the presentation, it's a site that's, again, it's a little bit different than some of the other projects, which are larger projects. This is probably the smallest of the recent multifamily projects that have come through. And so because of that, there's just constraints in terms of what you can actually fit from a commercial standpoint. And then also not being on Broad and not being on Washington, it significantly limits kind of the realm of successful commercial. I mean, we could come in and tell you it's going to, be retail, but in all likelihood, it would just be vacant. And I don't know that that's a good solution for anybody, or high turnover space.
And then if you just look top down at the site, there's no retail, there's no commercial functionality on the residents of West Broadside, right up against Harris Teeter. There's no frontage on the Broad Street side because we're backing up to Perkin Harbour. So it limits us to West Annandale and Maple. Of those two, Maple's where you want the frontage.
Yeah.
And then we need loading docks and parking garage entrances, so they have to go on the other side. So we're very limited in time. We've played with that a lot to see how we could maximize commercial space, and just the size of the site and the constraints we're working with lead us to this result. In terms of size, use is a different story.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron?
So I agree with what everyone has said, from Mrs. Scott's environmental concerns and trying to get this up to LEED Gold and having more kind of public gathering space, more ground level green space. I think I have some more fundamental threshold concerns about the project. I mean, it's a surface parking lot. Yes, we would like to see a surface parking lot redeveloped with something, right? That brings the city more, but I don't think that you should take that for granted as a development team in terms of wanting to, get those increased revenues. We still want to make sure that this generally fits within a broader cohesive vision. Right now, they're pretty extensive staff level, comments that I just hope that you look at, and internalize about kind of the fiscal return on the project. It's kind of, our EDO is pretty good at getting this modeling done well for the city. It's at about $85,000. I know you put your fiscal return at about $1 million, so there's big discrepancy there. You're looking not only to get the special exceptions, but essentially to rezone, from a B2 to B1. So whether this is a B1 with a full height bonus, or this is, I just don't feel like we as the council should be doing a lot of twists and turns to try to accommodate projects when we have a lot of building going on, versus projects really looking at the small area plan, the comp plan, and what our ideal sort of fiscal returns are to bring in something that has a better commercial component and kind of better flow, as you're hearing from everyone, than this project does right now. And I actually kind of like the look of the project. I like kind of the design, the cubist kind of nature of it. I think that the building itself looks interesting, but I don't kind of want to get ahead of fundamental issues about whether you're even in compliance with the B2 district that you're seeking to build in, and then everything else that you need in terms of special exceptions. And we've just kind of gone through planning proposal by proposal, but we still do try to adhere to our comp plan and our small area plans, and this is supposed to be, commercial kind of mixed use, not residential mixed use. You're seeking the exception to get residential mixed use, and I understand why, given kind of the commercial environment right now, but that concern with the sewer capacity basically being non-existent right now are real concerns. And when you go into kind of board and commission review on Wednesday, I think you're going to hear a lot of the comments just about the green space and the building and the facades, but I don't want to give you a false sense of fundamental issues still with the projects and the fiscals and just the uses. My reaction to the daycare, having not been too long ago as a daycare drop-off parent at multiple different locations, I have the same concerns about the use and it not being a permitted use, but beyond that, the flow from the kids, from the parking garage into the daycare. I'm assuming that the daycare is partially sited there to take advantage of big chimneys being across the street. So what you do with, kids who are toddler and preschool age, or the little, buggy cart that they bring the infants out in, how you're going to get them out of a commercial corner past a loading dock across a traffic circle to a park is concerning, right, in terms of just the flow of that whole area. Also, we've been looking for, if you kind of look at the other projects, kind of transparency on our facades, 70% transparency in window space so that you can see what's happening inside buildings. For the most part, daycares that I encounter tend to have, translucent windows at best if they're not completely opaque, because you're not kind of generally looking at the kids inside. And so what does that mean for kind of any pedestrian connection, both coming down, say, South Maple and across West Annandale? And so to me, this kind of has a fishbowl effect, this building, because most people are not going to be there for the daycare unless they're actually paying for the daycare, and people are not going to be there for the fitness unless they reside in the building, and because there's no flow through the building, as much as people don't like going through the Harris Teeter parking garage right now, it's at least a throughway. Whereas right now you're coming down South Maple, you're getting around the whole side, and then you still have to come around the edge of the building. And I do that walk too at the kid. I tell you, it's not an easy one. And just like commercial connection, the small area plan talks about kind of commercial entertainment areas. We're going to have the State Theater and have Creative Cauldron up there and have the grocery store, and Quinn's going to be down the block. And so this feels like a real missed opportunity to get people in and out of this building as both a public gathering spaces and also, commercial retail restaurant use in the building. When you think about, individuals at Quinn getting from there up to the Whole Foods, like this seems like a natural stop, or families who are Big Chimneys or in town for some reason, like it could be a better use to have, something like a Ruthie's All Day at the bottom of that building than having a diner, right? Than having, it's right across from the bowling alley. Like, what is the relationship of this building to the area around it? Let me see what else I have. On the daycare too, I looked at, I like the model of the daycare. I looked at the other locations of it, but it's expensive. I mean, it's like a $2,500 a month daycare. And I do have concerns, where a lot of the residential rentals we're putting up are studio and 1-bedrooms. They don't have a lot of kids and families in those buildings. So, what the usage is like, it probably is not sort of daycare that workforce is going to be using in the city, given the price of that monthly daycare. And a lot of our families in the city are in single family homes. They tend to be on the larger side. And so whether they're really looking for co-working space versus dropping kids off and going home to work there is kind of another consideration, and in just that use and whether it's the best use of a kind of central space. The loading dock. So the loading dock seems like a strange location to me. I don't even know, bringing the parking garage entrance to where the loading dock entrance is, if that would make more sense. But to come around again, the roundabout, and kind of hit the loading dock, and for the loading dock to be in between the commercial entrance and the residential entrance just seems like an odd choice. And that in the Harris Teeter, I think, it was negotiated to have kind of a drive aisle through and out the other side. And here, we just ended up with a mid-block loading dock on South Maple at the Quinn project. There's going to be trucks backing in and out of that loading dock something like 80 times a week. And so to have another back in and out loading dock, not too far up the street, kind of just, it feels to me like has too many sort of traffic interruptions. So thinking about maybe something to do with that.
And just on
the
loading dock location, the reason that we had placed it there was making sure that it can appropriately serve the commercial space. So it's sort of right behind where the sort of service corridor of that commercial space would be. So you've got the connection with the trash, and Two Birds is probably not going to need a ton of delivery space. But if that turns into a different type of commercial, you do want that loading space and the trash.
Right. I'm just saying, think about it, because it's a traffic circle. And so, it's supposed to be moving a little bit more.
Yeah, it's something that we've looked at in terms of kind of how we site that. And I think, unfortunately, there's not like an ideal location, both for sort of functionality and distance from the traffic circle. And so, that location seemed to be the sort of the middle ground and the best location for it. But it's something that we're open to looking at.
And you don't think there's any space like on the back of your building where the lot line goes up to the bank line, that you would have any ability to kind of do a like an exit out the back?
We won't own the Burke and Herbert the whole way through, so or any kind of walkway or anything on that side. Like if we owned all of it and were able to assemble it all, that would.
It's sort of different than the Harris Teeter site where they own the block.
Oh yeah, I know, but you have back space. Yeah, you have space where you could come out the back and like conceivably have a curb cut going out onto South Maple, and that's not ideal either. But in terms of traffic flow,
yeah, again, we're open to looking at stuff that, adding another curb cut right next to the Burke and Herbert curb cut, it feels like that might actually create more problems than it solves. But, we're open to looking at, site design and addressing everything you brought up.
And then Ms. Hiscott was getting at this. When we see this the next time, if you could include an elevation of what this would look like from the corner, for example, of North Maple and Broad. So looking across the street towards the bank, what your building looks like behind that in terms of the streetscape, I think would be an angle that most of us would be interested in seeing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's all I have for now. Dave?
Thanks a lot. So I'll try to be brief. My colleagues have made some excellent comments. I don't think this meets the basic threshold for special exception in any way, shape, or form. It's basically a 190 plus unit apartment building, which is not the kind of housing we really need based upon the fact that we've built more than 1,000 of these similar units in the past few years. There's little real commercial, if any at all. It's not LEED Gold. The build out is a maximum build out, little environmental benefits, minimal net revenue, minimal affordable housing. It's just in every way, shape, or form fails, I believe, as a technical matter to begin to meet the special exception. And as a practical matter, I've gone through pretty much all the policy arguments the council has made for granting special exception, and this project doesn't meet any of them. So I think, frankly, it's a waste of resources to continue until the proposer comes back with a development that truly is special, meets our special exception ordinance in a technical standpoint, and meets it from a policy standpoint. I promise to be brief, but clear. I would rather see another proposal come before us rather than occupy the time of our boards and commissions to further look at this proposal, because I don't think it gets past the starting line. Thanks.
Thank you. So I have some comments. I echo a lot of my colleagues. So things I do like. Clearly underutilized parcel. I think the parking lot, we all would like to see a different use. I have no problem with your uses. I think housing is necessary. Daycare, I think, would be a fine use on the ground floor, as well as working with CRI for kind of adults with disabilities is laudable. But I do think there are a lot of areas to improve. So in general, with most projects, we have tried to raise the bar. And when I go through all the things that Dave and Debbie and everyone's gone through, like, we haven't approved the LEED Silver building since 2016. So we've raised the bar on that. Affordable housing, I think we are up to 10% at Broad and Washington, which was approved in 2019. Cementitious materials, open space requirements, everything that we kind of look at from a special exception perspective. I think we've tried to raise the bar with each project. So we'd love to see this project get there as well. pedestrian porosity, I think people talked about. I know it's a small site, but I am worried about kind of the access as it is on that big corner. And then a bigger concern that I have, which I don't think anyone has raised so far, is I know that not everything needs to be multi-acre or assembled, but I am concerned that we are orphaning the Burke and Herbert site. I think that leaves, I think you guys put up the parcel that's left is about 20,000 square feet, and realistically, not much is going to happen there. And so if that's a long-term kind of plan, then let's acknowledge that. But I am worried about what this does. And so I think you've heard some concerns about, commercial viability. And I'm in the camp where I don't want to force commercial where it doesn't want to be commercial. And so I understand that at the South Maple and Annandale corner, that's probably not a great place for commercial. But if you really do want commercial, you really need that Broad Street frontage. So I'd encourage you guys to talk to Burke and Herbert further, especially in the world of retail making where everyone is consolidating branches. It just seems very 90s to keep this one branch around. Especially when there's an M&T bank next door they could temporarily move into. They could get great ground floor space in the new building. So I'd encourage you to look at that, because I do think that when you're leaving a 20,000 square foot parcel left, not much is going to happen on that site. And so regardless of what phase 2 you might commit to. So overall, I think there's some good uses, but I do think there's lots of room to improve from what we've seen today. So thank you for your time and your work on this, and we'll look to staff for kind of the update.
Thank you very much.
Great. Any other final comments or things? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mayor, it's 9:52. Do we want to offer a quick break for folks before we dive in, or you guys want to just plow forward?
I think floodplain we're going to commit to doing quickly, right, guys?
I say we go for it.
Floodplain discussion's quick, right? So, okay, then.
How much control over FEMA's floodplain decisions?
Okay, all right, let's do it.
Power through, we said.
All right, so our last item for this evening is a work session to review and discuss proposed changes to the city's floodplain ordinance. So FEMA's new flood insurance rate map concerning the city of Falls Church will be effective June 6th of 2024. And as part of that process, there are some updates we need to make to the city's floodplain ordinance by May 6th of 2024. And so we've got Jeff Rubin joining us virtually this evening to give the staff report on this, on the proposed changes. Jeff will walk through some of the background of what we're proposing. There's some obligatory changes that we need to make, and then there are 5 recommended changes that staff has identified that we'd like to kind of share with you all this evening. So, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Young, Mayor Hardy, and City Council members. My name is Jeff Rubin. I'm the GIS and Floodplain Manager for the city. Tonight, I'll be solely wearing my floodplain hat. I'm here to give a brief overview of FEMA's National Floodplain Insurance Program, along with the community rating system, in an effort to educate and provide context for this ordinance change. The National Floodplain Insurance Program, or NFIP, provides flood insurance throughout the country and is required for all federally backed mortgages and if the homes are in the floodplain. The way insurance rates are calculated changed about 2 years ago. Now they're based on specific features of the property and its proximity to floodplains. And generally this has resulted in lower insurance rates for our residents, which is great. FEMA has created new maps for our region through a process spanning about 3 or 4 years. It's been 20 years, actually, since we got new maps. The preliminary and revised maps were sent to the previous mayor in 2022 on April 29th and then October 20th, respectively. There have been no changes from the revised versions, so those will become our effective maps on June 6th. The update to regional floodplain maps triggers a review of all the floodplain ordinances within a region, and this is per FEMA. This is the primary reason I'm speaking to you tonight. The ordinance that we've laid out, or a version of it, must be adopted by May 6th of this year in order to give FEMA the requisite month to review and approve the ordinance by the time their maps become effective. The consequences are pretty severe if we miss the deadline. This includes rendering the city ineligible for most forms of disaster assistance and loans from federal agencies like SBA. So that's the doom and gloom part. Switching gears a little bit, the community rating system is a program nested within the NFIP that helps discount individual insurance rates through various activities at the community level. These extra activities span a wide range and earn credits, which add up to assigned class levels. There are 10 CRS classes. Class 10, or not participating in the CRS, provides no discount, sort of like putting your name on the SAT, getting 400 points, but you don't really get anything else. On the other end of the spectrum is Class 1, which is the best and provides a discount of 45% to all flood insurance within the region. Falls Church is currently rated a Class 7, with our residents currently enjoying a 15% discount on their flood insurance rate. These CRS class ratings are reviewed every 5 years. In our last review, we unfortunately slipped from Class 6 to Class 7 through no fault of our own. But in an effort to return to Class 6, staff are recommending 4 activities that fall into a category called higher regulatory standards, which would protect our residents from flood damage. There is a 5th recommendation, which is a response to a resident request that aligns with our floodplain management goals and promotes the health of our floodways, but won't actually count toward the CRS class. These recommendations began on line 54, but to quickly list them, they include an increase of 6 inches to our freeboard requirement, the introduction of a rolling 5-year period for assessing substantial improvements, a 1% reduction to the substantial improvement threshold, a non-conversion agreement for spaces that aren't suited for habitation within the floodplain, and a more detailed regulation of fences in the floodway. There are many more activities that we hope to participate in to improve our rating in the next year, but given the tight timeline in front of us for this ordinance, these are the only ones that these are the ones we could really get to that provide a really big bang for a buck. So with that, staff is requesting the council conduct the first of 2 public hearings on March 11th this year, and also refer this matter to Planning Council for their review, as well as in order to meet the aforementioned deadline. Fiscal impacts are listed on line 95, and briefly, as mentioned, it's mainly to the residents that the impacts are felt unless we don't meet the deadline. The timeline ahead of us, as shown on, I didn't write down the line, as shown on line 104, is today, this work session, March 11th, is the first reading, Planning Commission first session, April 3rd, April 17th for the Planning Commission public hearing, and then we come back for the second reading on April 29th in time to send it off to FEMA for their review, and everything becomes effective June 6th. So that's it. Hopefully that was nice and brief, but I'm sure that was kind of dense. So please hit me with whatever questions you've got.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie?
Thanks, Jeff, for outlining that. It looks pretty straightforward in terms of what we need to do in the next very short time frame. So my question is actually what we do after that. You said these are the steps that we can take and fit within this specific time frame. Is there are there the next steps 5 through 10 that we should be addressing over the balance, the time frame from when we're doing, wrap up this review until the next review that we can put into motion over a period of time, so we aren't stuck in we have to do all these things in a short period next time? Like how do we address that moving forward, I guess?
Sure. Well, so the rush in this instance is the release of new maps. And so that, given it's been 20 years since, they don't have a necessarily regular turnover for the release of those because they're, it's nationwide, and I'm sure they have a schedule, but they certainly don't share it with us. So I don't think this kind of rush to get an ordinance through is going to be a significant issue in the future. But I think
I'm less concerned about the ordinance than I am about the steps that you identified. You said there are many more steps we could take. So I guess to the extent we can learn what those are over time and how we address that to give us a higher rating, to do right by our citizens. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I actually have I have a list of, I think, 17 activities that we've identified over the last week or so. Speaking with a consultant with FEMA, they mainly involve, there's a whole host of things, but things to include regulating what is called the X shaded area, used to be called the 500-year flood zone. Regulate that as if it were also the same as this 100-year flood or 1% flood area. Just extend those same regulations out to the 500-year or X shaded is one significant one. Limiting what can be done in. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I don't mean to put you on the spot to identify them now. I just want to put forward that I think we should have a plan. If these have been highlighted as important things to work on, that we continue to incorporate them in over the next 10 years, whatever it is, whatever the time frame is. That was my only comment.
Absolutely the plan.
Thank you.
Erin?
Yeah, thank you. So I had a few different questions, and as I understood this, there's like a basic update that we would need to do, and then the optional heightened standards. And so, I mean, I think for purposes of first reading, right, it makes sense to have all the heightened standards included, and then we can understand, like, are there actually adverse effects on homeowners that we need to be aware of in terms of some of the standards that we choose. Like, there's a balance of, you want to have heightened standards because you don't necessarily want people building or improving in areas that are flood districts, or you actually don't really want to insure there because you're trying to not incentivize people to build in places that are places they shouldn't build. But at the same time, they're looking at the maps. A lot of homes, like it looks like Westmoreland, has a lot of homes in this area, and so I can't yet understand from the staff report kind of what the effects may be on individual homeowners, and if it makes more of their homes non-conforming, for example, or what that may be. So I guess I'm saying I generally support the idea of the heightened standards and doing first reading on the heightened standards, but I really want to understand adverse impacts of the heightened standards on homeowners in this area, because I think there are increased numbers of homes, but the standards are also changing for the pre-existing homes in the floodplain district. So I would just like a better understanding of that. And sometimes, I didn't dig into the FEMA, National Flood Insurance Program regulations or anything like that, but oftentimes when they're doing updated standards, there's like rulemaking and there are comments that kind of talk about, this could be an adverse effect on us for these reasons. And so if they exist and you have access to them and can look at them and flag whether there should be anything on our radar from them, I'd appreciate it.
So if you look at line 41, current city of Falls Church residential structures that do not meet these new regulations will not be penalized for nonconformity in terms of insurance rating and whatnot. That won't change their insurance rates.
Right, but then the next sentence, if you don't do anything to your home, it's not going to affect you at all. But if you were to try to improve your home, I'm trying to understand the difference between someone who wants to improve their home under the basic update versus improve their home under the heightened standard, and whether there's any difference in the heightened standards we're seeking to get to class 6, for example. Like, can we be at class 6 without some of the things that may be more adverse to owners? I'm not saying I'm not going to support heightened standards. I just want to understand what the individual impact is for some homeowners beyond the insurance rate in terms of what property rights they may lose or become much more difficult to exercise under heightened standards, if that's an issue. Then in the actual ordinance language, what do I have? On line, let me see, 83. It's not the language, it's one of the 5 changes. It talks about granting the community a right to inspect within a minimum 48 hours notice. What does it mean by a community right to inspect something versus a city staff right to inspect?
That's what it means, city staff.
Okay, so long as that's clear, I guess, in the language. Line 83, this is just the overview, talks about grants the community a right to inspect. And I don't know if in the ordinance language itself, it's clear that we're talking about city staff a right to inspect, but it caught my eye just in terms of who has the right to inspect what. And then line 282, I think this is in the actual ordinance, and this may be a question for the city attorney. The pre-existing language, I think if there was a violation, used to talk about maybe you'd have, some judicial body adjudicating a possible misdemeanor that would then be punishable by a fine up to $2,500 or 12 months in jail or both. And then line 282 now talks about any person who fails to comply with any of the requirements or provisions of this subdivision or directions of the director of planning or any authorized employee of the City of Falls Church shall be guilty of the appropriate violation and subject to the penalties thereof. And then it talks about Virginia building code violations, but I wasn't sure, what does it mean to be guilty of a floodplain violation? And is it like a due process issue for the city to determine your guilt? If the city attorney could just look at that, it seemed a little bit strange to me in terms of the rewrite, and I didn't know if it was our language or if that was FEMA language. And to the extent it's our language, I think you need to look at it, Sally. In 742, I think the ordinance talks about an AE zone, and I saw in the FEMA documents it defines AE zones, but I don't know anywhere in here if we've defined an AE zone. So that's another thing to look at. It's like they're graded somehow.
AE zone would be 802.
Online at 802, Jeff? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess AE zones or AH zones, do we need some cross-reference to what an AE zone or an AH zone is, or where that comes from? It's just not clear. I think it's in the map itself or it's in the FEMA documents, but... that is the definition. The areas shall be those areas for which 1% annual chance flood elevation shall be provided, and the floodway has not been delineated. That is on the map, and that should be attached to your handout. Line 866. There is an and or in that sentence. I think that should be and it should be something other than an and or, right? So it's either that the more restrictive provisions apply and those pertaining to the floodplain districts shall apply. It needs to read one way or the other. And so just if you could also look at that, Sally.
866. Thank you.
Yep. And then, like I said, my overarching concern was just understanding kind of the effect of this and making sure that property owners, to the extent they're on notice for the hearings, kind of can better grasp what this means for them. And it's not like we're providing them counsel or advice, but it just wasn't really clear to me. It's kind of in the scorecard for the city, and we have our own property. Seemingly, this kind of extends up to Aurora House, and it's near the park space, and so I understand why we want to do this, but I just also want to understand what it means for people. And the map seemed to focus mostly down on the Trips Run area, and I didn't know if the maps also affected over by the 4-mile run area and down Shadow Walk and there. But it looks like this mostly is this, yeah. Okay. Okay, well, that was it. Thanks.
In terms of communication, you're saying when, so they're not affected, this is only when you change your property and you're just covering the communications to them and their rights when they do so. Okay. Just making sure I'm keeping up with the lawyers.
Who else?
Just a couple thoughts about flooding, just to put this in perspective. 99% of U.S. counties were affected by a flooding disaster from 1996 to 2019. 90% of natural disasters in the U.S. involve flooding. They're 27 times more likely to experience a flood than a fire during the 30-year war. Flooding is climate change driven and development driven, and pretty much the rule of thumb is if it rains, you're in an area that can flood because of the flooding, the amount of rain at one time, and the flooding of the small streams. You don't have to be anywhere near a coast to have a major flooding. So just to put it in context of the discussion. And, I think a lot of this we don't really have any choice about, but I think we really ought to we ought to be thinking about how to make our community as resilient as possible in this deteriorating environment. Just a couple thoughts. Thanks.
Mary Beth?
This is a question for Jeff Rubin. The other night there was a town hall on the greening of Lincoln, and there's whole areas of Lincoln that are flooding now that hopefully will be fixed once that project is done. Does that change these maps at all, or not?
No. So the these maps are again created by FEMA through hydrologic studies, and their definition of a floodplain is any point through which 2 acres of rain flow will cross, if that makes sense. So a watershed of less than 2 acres is not mapped by FEMA. That does not mean that we can't create our own areas that we regulate the same as floodplain. We can, and that is one of the activities that we'll be looking into, I think, in the future. But it was not designated by FEMA for those reasons, so it's not on the maps.
Okay.
In the same way.
Yep. Thanks.
Justine?
Could you just walk through some of because there are 5 changes. There was some language in there that I just didn't understand. So
sure.
We'll start with the first one. I'm not is increased freeboard requirement. Is it just like the distance that you are from the water or a building, or what does that mean?
So it's vertical. So freeboard requirement is it is currently a 1 foot or 12 inches above the base flood elevation, which is the elevation that a 100-year or 1% flood event is rated to flow at. So that's the height of the water at a 1% flood event. Minimum requirements for a class, I think it's class 8, which is worse than us, is a 1 foot. We are suggesting or recommending a increase from 12 inches to 18 inches because that risk rating process that the NFIP started employing a couple years ago rounds up feet-wise. So going from 12 to 18 inches will actually afford residents effectively 2 feet of freeboard in terms of insurance calculation, with only 6 inches of extra space, if that makes sense.
So if I understand correctly, this is how high the building is set. So this would be for new construction where the foundation goes, or what would it be?
So it's the technical language is the top of the bottom floor. So where the bottom floor is, the very top of that finished floor has to be currently 12 inches above that base flood elevation. And new construction, just to get the definition correct, so just to be transparent, is any development. It is not a new building being constructed. It can be an addition as well.
And then for the 5-year rolling period, it's just if the property increases their value by, I guess, 50% in this case, within that 5-year period, they would then be subject to these rules. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the substantial. Did I currently? I'm not sure it's totally clear. Okay. So the definition of substantial improvement is currently if 50% or more of the value of the structure, so not the parcel, not the land, just the improvement on it as put forth by the assessor, if 50% or more of that value is spent in improvements to the building or to the structure, currently over a 12-month period, that qualifies as a substantial improvement, and the entire structure must be brought up to current code.
So in a case where somebody does 40% in 1 year and then 4 years later
exactly.
decide to do 10%, then they would suddenly have to comply by all of the standards. Okay.
That's the change. Yes, that's the update.
I guess the other, I'm just making sure, non-conversion agreement, could you just explain that a little bit more?
Do you want to go to, there's one between those two, the 415 to 49?
Do other people, I mean, I don't want to waste too much time here. I understand that.
Pretty straightforward.
That one is straightforward to me, yeah.
Okay, just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, sure, sorry. Yeah, could you explain the non-conversion agreement?
Yeah, so this is essentially for garages and like sheds or structures of that kind that are because if you have a house, it's hard to elevate a garage essentially. Like that's not really practical because that requires fill. We don't really allow fill very often in a lot of these cases, meaning just more dirt essentially. It's because that would reroute the waterway. So we allow for those with other sort of details, like flood vents and all these other things. So we want to make sure that those don't become habitable spaces, especially during a turnover of ownership or whatnot. So having something that goes on the deed would be really, really helpful in enforcing those kinds of requirements. So this is one way that, and a lot of this is coming from the state, by the way. They have a whole template and provided a lot of recommendations to us, and we picked the ones that were, again, kind of the low-hanging fruit. And this was one of those choices.
For fences in the floodway, what would be the issue with the fence in the floodway? Is it just that it blocks water flow?
Yeah, actually. So there's we've had a couple of we've noticed a couple of fences. There hasn't been a formalized way to get it to approval process for a fence in the floodway and whatnot. There's been kind of a way to do it, but it's not been terribly consistent. So this is a lot of this was working with Akita, the zoning administrator as well, and we came up with this concept to make it more clear where fences can and cannot go, what kind of fence needs to basically allow water to pass through, because we've had a couple instances and reports of fences blocking water from making its way, over land and backing water up to flood houses where that house probably didn't need to flood if the fence were more porous, essentially.
Okay, that was all. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Anyone else? So maybe a question for Sally. So this is a pretty substantial rewrite of the whole ordinance, and there's something I think Dave said we may not just have a choice in. When we compare this with national standards or our neighbors, is this in line? Or are we just lifting language that's kind of pretty standard?
It should be in line with your neighbors because the state wrote the ordinance. That's my understanding, correct, Jeff? That I know we edited it in in small part, is my understanding, but the bulk of the language came from the State Department of Conservation and Recreation, if that's correct.
That's correct. But Mayor Hardy, to your point, is this in line with where they're at? Fairfax County has higher standards than we do in a number of ways. I think they have a 20-foot horizontal setback from the floodplain for any development, I believe. So just from that line moving sideways, which we don't have anything to that extent at all. They have prohibitions that we don't have, a number of other things. I don't have a full list currently.
So Jeff, I guess there are obviously pros and cons with whether you want to be more restrictive. Did we consider those? And we decided on these. I assume the thought process already happened where we settled on these and we did consider.
Yes. There were many discussions. I don't know where it is in the pipeline, but I'm aware of a potential development along Jefferson, North Jefferson. That would be in the floodplain, maybe even touching the floodway. So there were a number of regulations that we didn't want to even touch at this time because we don't want to throw a bunch of barriers at a project that probably will be good for the water system. Just would throw some blocks in that development process that we could adopt after the fact.
But if our standards were higher, the benefit to our taxpayers would be then the insurance rates would be lower?
Yes.
Okay. I guess for the purposes, given the tight timeline, I guess I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation, but I do think that that thought process of, gosh, if we should up our standards and prevent people from flooding, and that may slow down some projects, but that might be the right call because we also see the benefit of actually lowering the insurance premiums for people. Like, I guess that discussion, I think, still needs to happen as well. So after this round, I understand that we have a short time frame.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, the next 6 to 20.
Yep. Second question. Wyatt mentioned, I think, at the mayor's meeting that there were a handful of homes that were brought into the floodplain that weren't before. And then in addition to Aaron's comments about impact to future improvements that property owners may want to do, what sort of communication has happened with those two classes of people, if any?
So in terms of this update, this has been an extremely abbreviated timeline, and I've been working just on this is my first time addressing an elected body, honestly. So a lot of this has been, thank you so much. This has been a really somewhat a steep learning curve. Never worked on any code of any kind before like this. So I have not gotten out about this specific thing. I also didn't know what the appetite would be for updates or whatnot, and didn't want to give misleading information, for instance, so having this session, this direction over this next week, I'll develop those outreach communications and whatnot.
Hey Jeff, this is Andy. Do you have, like we were talking earlier about, like the actual count of affected properties? Can you share that with the group?
Yes. Yeah. So I broke this up between floodway and 1% floodplain, just because those are pretty big distinctions. So for Trips Run, the floodway is almost identical. No parcels or structures will be moving in or out. But for the 1% floodplain, 11 parcels are coming out of the floodplain and 2 are going in. No structures are clearly moving in or out. It's really, really narrow, so I don't think it's going to make a difference for any of the structures along that line. For 4 Mile Run, the floodway is narrower to the south, so 2 parcels will be moving out of the floodway. But the study is extended to the north of North Washington Boulevard. So a handful of parcels along Jefferson are now partially in the floodway. And then for the 1% floodplain for 4 Mile Run, 11 new parcels are moving into the floodplain and 4 structures will be added, 2 commercial, 2 residential.
Got it.
Kind of the punchline is there's 4 structures in total that are, moving into this, new requirement.
2 commercial, 2 residential. And in terms of like just total area, It's the floodway, 1% flood and 0.2% flood area have all, floodway and 1% flood area have decreased by about an acre and a half.
Do localities have the responsibility to communicate to property owners when the maps change, or is it kind of it's on you? You're supposed to just look up where you are on the FEMA flood maps.
FEMA has already done it. They've posted about it. They've done advertisements, but it is also our responsibility. Well, we have one of the activities that we have done and are going to continue to do is semi-regular outreach, and I will be including that in my outreach materials.
Great.
And then in addition to what Jeff's describing, we also, because this is a zoning text amendment and a zoning map amendment, have legal notice requirements under state code. So anyone who is going in or out will get a letter from the city, and the text amendment is advertised through the newspaper.
Okay. And it's not just structures, it's if your property in general.
Property, not your structure, but any part of your property.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
I would just add the bigger picture here, and I'm going to leave aside the technical issues, but the bigger picture here is that flooding is a major risk getting bigger as a result of climate change, and infrastructure needs to be looked at now more than just concrete and steel, but also nature-based solutions, which means it means adding to open space and all the other environmental elements that have been identified. So I think there's a bigger picture here which we might want to grapple with later on.
Okay. I think.
I know there's a parks plan, and I remember seeing something about like taking over houses in the floodplain. Is that still something that the city's planning to do, or no?
So I believe we've got one property that we've acquired kind of in recent years down by Oak Street Elementary that, fits that category that will eventually, demolish and turn into open space. Open space is one of those elements that, is continually on the capital improvements plan, beyond the plan that's going to the Planning Commission on Wednesday. It's a little tricky sometimes to allocate money, to something that you're not, when you don't have a property identified. And so I think that's one of the constant challenges that the city works through. But yeah, as an aspirational goal, I think, yes, that is something, acquiring properties in the floodplain and turn it into, open space is I think something the city aspires to do.
But I was just wondering if there's like a list or a clear plan as of now as to like what properties the city's interested in, or no, it's just sort of on an ad hoc basis.
I don't know that I know the answer to that. Cindy, do you got any thoughts?
There is a rough list when the Open Space Task Force served, but it needs to be updated and fit into a more strategic plan. So that list exists, and planning has periodically looked at whether we want to do TDRs, transfer development rights, with using floodplain properties for that. That hasn't been formalized yet into any council work plan activity.
Yeah, I guess something I would generally be interested in is like making sure that if a property does come up that the city might be interested, that we just don't miss it.
Yes, it's opportunity based right now.
And we have.
Anything else?
Can I, on that point, can I just mention that there is an extension from Cavalier Trail Park to, I guess, Oak Street Elementary School, through a bunch of properties between Cameron and Sharrow, kind of the backs of those properties. There's a bicycle master plan that's supposed to go through there, and that is the floodway that would maintain the health or improve the health. Sorry about my voice. That would improve the health of that floodway probably significantly. And so I feel like those dovetail. A planning commissioner whose name I don't recall shared that with me, and I thought that worked very nicely.
Great. Well, nice work, Jeff, for your first time in front of council.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your work.
Jeff.
All righty. That's it. Is it for official items. Do we have anything else to bring up? Andy and Cindy?
Nothing for me, pending any questions that I can answer or we can answer from any of you.
I just had one comment that we have for the past couple of weeks been talking about, well, specifically the past couple of weeks, but years been talking about enforcement, speeding enforcement, and there's been an effort on Oak and Fulton and on Pennsylvania, and several neighbors have thanked me and asked me to pass that thanks on to all those involved with the extra effort to enforce speeding limits. And then on Pennsylvania, they put up, there was a sheriff's car and one of those signs saying how fast you're going right at the intersection of Fulton and Pennsylvania, and that was very appreciated by many community members. So I just want to pass that on. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Keep it up. Anything else? Okay, let's call it a night. Let's adjourn 10:32. Thank you all.